Hey, quick question. What would you do if the girl who once ruled your school suddenly showed up at your door, bruised, broken, and with nowhere else to go? She used to look down on him. Now, they're living together. And this is where the story begins. A blonde girl in a high school uniform sits on a chair. Hayashi Megumi, beautiful and strong-willed, was called the queen in high school, in a store where a guy named Yamamoto worked the night shift. He was stunned when he handed her a bag of groceries. Hayashi, whom Yamamoto once hated. She revealed a secret to him that he was never supposed to know. Yamamoto saw the bruises on her arm and asked about them. Hayashi pulled her arm away, and when he asked her, she lowered her head. A couple of hours ago, Yamamoto was cleaning the shower, scrubbing with a brush and rinsing with water. He smiled when he saw that everything was clean and shiny. He was happy with the results of his hard work. Yamamoto remembers Hayashi as a person who behaved unreasonably. He wipes the sweat from his forehead, proud of himself that everything turned out well. Looking at his phone, he is surprised to see that he is late for his part-time job at a store in a residential area. Yamamoto is glad that they rarely have visitors at night, because night shifts pay more. Yamamoto looks tiredly at the cameras while on his shift. He is worried that it is too quiet and worries that the store will go out of business. He is surprised when he notices a customer on the camera. Yamamoto is already at the cash register, ringing up items when someone calls his name. The girl talks about a long-ago meeting, her voice sounding familiar. Yamamoto looks at the girl in surprise. It can't be, he thinks. Yamamoto says her name, Hayashi. The girl nods. He is unpleasantly surprised by her appearance and wonders, did she move to Tokyo too? Hayashi asks if Yamamoto lives nearby. He replies that he does and asks her the same question. She vaguely said that she did too. Hayashi asks which university he has been accepted to. Hearing his answer, she is surprised and reminds herself that he has always been smart. Yamamoto lowers his eyes and thinks, are they just chatting like this? He scans the items and remembers that 4 months have passed since graduation and that Hayashi has changed a lot. He remembered that this would never have happened at school. Yamamoto remembered how Hayashi used to listen to the teacher sleepily at school. While she was yawning, she dropped her eraser with her elbow. And Yamamoto watched this while sitting in the row next to her. Yamamoto looked at Hayashi, who was listening to the teacher with boredom. He wondered whether to pick up the eraser. He decided to pick it up, and as he reached for it, he thought that if he didn't, she would complain later. He picked up the eraser, turned toward Hayashi, and was very surprised when he saw her contemptuous look at him. Yamamoto carefully placed the eraser on the edge of the table and told her that she had dropped it. Hayashi looked at him with contempt. Yamamoto, sitting at his desk, was surprised by her behavior and wondered, what's wrong with her? Yamamoto recalled that she was beautiful despite her personality, had lots of friends, was popular, and boys were constantly confessing their love to her. Yamamoto remembered seeing such a confession in the school parking lot. He wondered, what do they all see in her? The boy awkwardly confessed his feelings to Hayashi and waited shyly for her answer. Hayashi sighed, loudly with disdain, surprising the guy who had confessed to her. Tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, she wondered who he was anyway. Over time, Hayashi earned the nickname Arrogant Queen. Yamamoto didn't have a single good memory of her, so he decided to limit himself to this conversation. He asked Hayashi if she needed a bag. She agreed. When she took it, his eyes widened at the bruises he saw on her. Hayashi pulled her arm away, pressing it against her body. The guy asked what had happened. The girl remained silent. Hayashi fiddled with the sleeve of her jacket. Yamamoto realized that it wasn't normal to wear such warm clothes in the middle of summer. He thought that what was under the sweatshirt was even worse than it seemed. After a brief silence, Hayashi said that her boyfriend had hit her. Yamamoto's eyes widened. He asked her boyfriend. Hayashi replied that he was at home now, and the protagonist asked again, and the girl replied that they lived together. Yamamoto asked if it wasn't too early to be living together. She clicked her tongue. Hayashi remembered with contempt that he was still the same chatterbox, and headed for the exit. Yamamoto wondered if she was angry. He remembered that she had never loved him. He wondered why she had told him that her boyfriend had beaten her. Had this queen shown her weakness? Yamamoto saw her approaching the exit and realized that she was going home, and suddenly became worried that her boyfriend would hit her again. Yamamoto clenched his fist and called out Hayashi's name. He awkwardly suggested that she stay with him tonight. Hayashi was indignant, but he immediately asked her not to look at him like that because it was awkward. Holding his hands out in front of him, he explained that he wouldn't do anything to her, and if she didn't believe him, he would just give her the key and sleep at an internet cafe himself. He advised her not to go home, and that it would be better to tell her parents everything and move back in with them. Hayashi said that her parents had disowned her. Yamamoto exclaimed in surprise, why? Hayashi explained that when she told her parents she was going to live with her boyfriend, they got so angry that they stopped paying for her education, so she dropped out of college. Yamamoto and Hayashi stood silently at the cash register. He sighed and asked her not to go home. The guy explained that he would go get the key and give her the address. Hayashi said she didn't need a key, and Yamamoto was surprised. The girl said she would wait. He didn't understand what. Hayashi lowered her gaze and began winding a strand of hair around her finger, explaining that she would wait until his shift ended. Yamamoto saw that her hand was shaking. He said his shift would end in about an hour and suggested she browse through some magazines while she waited. Hayashi nodded. Yamamoto wondered, is this the queen? Because he remembered how everyone constantly fawned over her and loved her. Yamamoto realized that this was not like her at all. He remembered the bruises on her arm and stood silently behind the cash register. After a while, they arrived at Yamamoto's house. Hayashi noticed, so this is where Yamamoto lives. He confirmed her thoughts and noted the cleanliness and orderliness. But the girl concluded that the word emptiness was more appropriate. Yamamoto asked her to sit down while he poured her some barley tea. Hayashi agreed and sat down. The guy noticed that it was too late to worry about that. Yamamoto now realized and was surprised that Hayashi was in his room, noting that it was a strange feeling. He thought that even though everything had happened naturally, he was nervous. The guy handed her iced tea and thought that he wasn't going to do anything with her anyway. Hayashi took a sip of tea from the glass and sighed. Hayashi realized that she would never have thought she would end up indebted to Yamamoto. He noted that he didn't remember her borrowing money from him because he had just done what needed to be done. The girl noted that everything had happened at the right moment, and she concluded that she and her boyfriend just needed time to cool off. She wondered aloud if he was in a bad mood. Yamamoto clarified. Her boyfriend, Hayashi, stared gloomily into her glass, saying that he didn't usually hit her, but when he had problems at work, everything annoyed him and she should have supported him better. Yamamoto pointed out that she would never say such a thing at school. The girl shut him up, noting that even she could change. Hayashi and Yamamoto watched TV. He thought about her words to let her boyfriend cool down, that he only hit her because he had a hard day and couldn't control himself. And if that was the case, then he shouldn't have invited Hayashi over. Yamamoto thought, if that's the case, but Yamamoto told Hayashi that she could stay the night, and she asked if she really could stay. He replied that when someone is in trouble, you have to help them. Hayashi smiled and said, a little embarrassed, that he would never have said that at school. She asked if she could take a shower at his place, and he said, whatever you want. She asked if he had anything for her to change into. He asked if men's clothes would be okay. Hayashi was in the shower while Yamamoto watched TV. Hayashi washed herself. Yamamoto sat tensely. He remembered her school days and remembered that she was in his bathroom. The guy looked at his watch and realized that it was time for him to get changed too. Hayashi came out of the shower, enthusiastically rejoicing at how good it felt. As she dried her hair, she asked why his bathroom was so clean. Yamamoto started to answer, but stumbled when he saw a bunch of bruises on the girl's body. His eyes widened, and he was shocked. Hayashi asked if it looked terrible and pointed out that her boyfriend was sometimes such a fool, pointing to the bruises again. Yamamoto awkwardly clarified that these bruises were old, right? The girl made it clear to Yamamoto with her whole demeanor and gaze that it was not worth bringing up this topic. But the guy didn't care, even though he said out loud that he thought she shouldn't be dating this guy. Hayashi snapped back, asking what he knew about her anyway. Yamamoto calmly said that he knew nothing, but that what he said was just his opinion, and it was up to her whether to listen to it or not. But he concluded that if something happened to her in the future, he would be to blame for not stopping her. Therefore, he wants to speak up, including for his own sake. Yamamoto asked if he beats her to relieve stress and if she still intends to support him after that. He thought, has she always been like this? She's just being used, and continued to say that it was a noble occupation and not everyone could live in such a selfish relationship. The guy noticed that he used to hate her. Hayashi pursed her lips. Yamamoto thought, why is he so angry? He told her that she was unlikely to hear any gratitude and would simply ruin her life. And if she wanted to leave, he wouldn't stop her. Hayashi looked down gloomily and remained silent. Yamamoto wondered if he had said too much, if she would think he was just exaggerating, and he was sure she would get angry now. He concluded in his mind that if she still didn't hear him, there was nothing more he could do. He looked at her, feeling slightly nervous. Hayashi hugged her knees and sighed wearily, wrapping her arms around herself and remarking, this is so result. The girl said she was sleepy. Yamamoto told her to lie down in bed, and he would sleep on the floor. Hayashi thanked him and lay down. Yamamoto sighed. He wished her a good night's sleep and told her to think everything over, asking her not to rush. Hayashi remarked that he was truly enlightened, that he understood everything about life, and that she was not surprised that he had no one. Yamamoto thought sarcastically that that was why he had no one. He closed the curtains and laid down on the floor. Yamamoto wondered how he would be able to sleep now. Hayashi turned to him from the wall. She looked at him and called out to him. Hayashi suggested they do it. Yamamoto was simply stunned by this suggestion. He thought about it and didn't understand this. That is exactly this. And, denying it, concluded that he had let Hayashi into his room simply on a whim, but he had no intentions. There was a rustling behind him. He wondered if she was teasing him. Hayashi grabbed him sharply. Yamamoto was very frightened and cried out, jerking. Then he asked what she was doing. Hayashi laughed and concluded aloud that he was awake after all. She ran her foot along Yamamoto's leg. He asked how she had decided to check that. He was embarrassed. His heart began to beat loudly. Hayashi noticed that she had simply hugged him, but the guy was indignant, asking who had given her permission to hug him, and she just asked back if she needed permission. Yamamoto thought that she should have gotten permission from her boyfriend, but decided that it wasn't worth talking about now. Hayashi thought for a moment and asked if he was still a virgin. His heart skipped a beat. The guy snapped no. The girl snapped back, "You're lying." Hayashi noticed and said that he was showing off and that it looked rather cute. Her chest pressed against the guy's back. Yamamoto told her to shut up and held her hand, which was trying to hug him. Her hand was trembling. She said that her boyfriend used to be completely different, that he was kind and caring, doing everything she asked him to do. But as soon as they started living together, everything changed. Yamamoto listened silently. Hayashi continued, saying that her boyfriend hits her every time he is in a bad mood, and how easily he loses his temper. Hayashi said how her boyfriend yelled at her that he was the only one earning money, and when she mentioned that she could also get a job, her boyfriend insisted that no one would hire her with only a high school diploma. Yamamoto and Hayashi lay silently. The girl asked, ironically, if it wasn't the most cheerful story, right? And she wished Yamamoto a good night. Yamamoto said, "She's still a good girl." Hayashi was surprised, her eyes wide open. Hayashi asked what Yamamoto had just said. He said he wouldn't repeat it. The girl demanded that he say it again and began to rock him. The guy said he wanted to sleep. Hayashi was even more surprised. She found it amusing and said, "Okay, if that's how it is." Yamamoto wondered what she wanted from him. He pressed himself against the pillow with his eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. Hayashi smiled. She leaned toward his face and said that no one had praised her in a long time. Yamamoto was embarrassed and mentally concluded that even despite their terrible relationship in the past, this was how they had started living together. In the morning, Yamamoto groaned. He sat up and scratched his head, groaning in pain, wondering why he was on the floor. He looked around. He saw Hayashi, whose t-shirt was slightly raised and whose shorts were pulled down. Hayashi was sleeping peacefully next to him. Yamamoto remembered what had happened yesterday. The girl next to him was snoring. Yamamoto flashed back to Hayashi in her school days with her sullen face full of disgust, and he remarked aloud with a smile that she had changed. Yamamoto was making breakfast. Hayashi woke up to the sounds and smells. The guy asked if she was awake. He pointed out that she had probably slept it off. Hayashi got up on all fours, realizing that yes, she was awake. She wished Yamamoto good morning and remarked that her body ached. He reminded her that he had told her to sleep in the bed. The girl told him to shut up and asked him not to sweat the small stuff. She approached him. Hayashi asked if he was making yakisoba. Yamamoto replied affirmatively. Hayashi was surprised. Could he cook? Yamamoto replied that he could and asked her to wait a little longer as it was almost ready. The girl asked again, almost. He replied that yes, it was. At the table, the girl took her first bite of the dish. Hayashi enthusiastically remarked that it was delicious. Yamamoto thanked her, looking at his phone, which was rude. The girl commented on his terrible manners aloud. Yamamoto put his phone away, realizing that he was used to living alone and feeling a little ashamed. Hayashi folded her hands and thanked him for breakfast, noting that it was very tasty. Yamamoto simply replied that he had followed the instructions on the label and noted that it tasted like store-bought food. Hayashi asked him not to spoil the compliment, as she was praising him. The guy apologized. She offered to wash the dishes, but Yamamoto pointed out that she was a guest and didn't need to do that. Hayashi said that she wanted to repay him for the room and food at least that way. The guy asked her to relax, saying it wasn't necessary. The girl asked him to be quiet. She asked if he had a hair tie. The guy said, why would he have a hair tie, and asked if a paperclip would work, taking out a box of paper clips. Hayashi was very surprised and told him in shock that he knew what would happen if he tied her hair with such a rubber band, because not only was it painful to tie it, but the rubber band also pulled out her hair. Yamamoto told her that he had no way of knowing that, but he had a shoelace. Would that work? Hayashi resigned herself and took the shoelace. The girl gathered her hair into a ponytail. She carefully tied it with the shoelace into a bow and stood up to wash the dishes. Yamamoto watched silently. He thought it would be better if she rested while she was staying with him. After a while, sitting at the table with tea, he suggested discussing what she would do next. After all, the choice was ultimately hers. Hayashi looked away and agreed with this statement, but she didn't want to regret her choice later. Yamamoto told her to look at the situation objectively and decide what she wanted, because if she thought it through carefully, she would have nothing to regret later. Hayashi noted that this was extremely difficult. He looked at her and said that it was impossible to do the right thing all the time. Sometimes you just give in to a moment of weakness. The girl was worried and said that this was precisely why she couldn't regret anything. Yamamoto said that it was possible. The girl denied that it would work. The guy assured her that everything would be fine. Hayashi didn't understand why he was so sure. He told her that it was simple. He pointed his thumb decisively at himself and asked if that wasn't why he was here. They looked at each other silently, and Yamamoto began to feel awkward and embarrassed. He summed up and explained to her that if she was afraid to make the choice herself, she should trust him and then they would decide together. Hayashi noted that she would never have thought she would hear anything encouraging from him. The guy pointed out that there was nothing encouraging about it. He was just trying to impose his opinion on her out of personal selfish motives. The girl snorted. Hayashi laughed and remarked that he was speaking in a confusing manner. Yamamoto was surprised. He suggested that they think about it together. It would be unpleasant for her at first, but he asked her to tell him everything about Hayashi's relationship with her boyfriend. She agreed. After the girl told him what had happened to her after she moved to Tokyo. Of course, she joked from time to time, but there was nothing funny about the story. She talked about the parts where she was beaten while she stood in the corner with a smile, and Yamamoto wondered why she was laughing at all. Hayashi reminded him that her boyfriend wasn't always mean, that he apologized, promising it wouldn't happen again, begging for forgiveness, and that he always said that. Yamamoto explained to her that domestic violence always follows a certain cycle. A period of violence, a period of remorse, a period of irritation when everything, even the little things, infuriates him, and what a vicious cycle it is. Hayashi came to a slight realization. She awkwardly remarked that Yamamoto seemed to know a lot about it, but he pointed out that he had read about it while she was washing the dishes, and then she understood. Yamamoto asked if she had discussed this topic with anyone else. Hayashi replied that he was the first. The guy noticed again in his thoughts that she had a lot of friends, didn't she? He asked her where her phone was. The girl replied that she didn't have one because her boyfriend said she didn't need it. Yamamoto asked if her boyfriend had broken her phone. Hayashi nodded. She pointed out that because of this, she had lost all her contacts and that her boyfriend wouldn't let her buy a new phone, so she was isolated. Yamamoto clenched his fists until they cracked. He thought that if something happened to her, he could say that he tried to stop her so he wouldn't be responsible, although that was his plan anyway, but he changed his mind. Yamamoto wanted Hayashi to break up with her boyfriend at any cost, and he didn't care how much she would hate him after that. Hayashi said that, of course, her boyfriend could be cruel, but he was a kind and sweet person. Yamamoto replied that he understood and thought about how he could convince the girl. But Hayashi continued, saying that she wanted to break up with him and that Yamamoto had helped her see the situation differently. The guy was surprised that Hayashi said that. The girl continued, saying that she believed he was right and that her boyfriend was just using her, reveling in the feeling of possessiveness. Yamamoto asked if she had made up her mind, what she would do next, and if he could offer her something. She asked what. The guy said that perpetrators of domestic violence are usually very obsessed with their victims, so he doubted that her boyfriend would agree with her decision. Yamamoto clarified that there was a possibility that her boyfriend would seek revenge out of resentment. These words made Hayashi tremble, and she wrapped her arms around herself. Yamamoto's suggestion was to make her boyfriend simply not want to mess with Hayashi. That would be their goal. The girl asked in surprise if Yamamoto was going to beat up her boyfriend, but he countered that this was going too far. The guy suggested that Hayashi go to a couple of places, starting with the hospital, and then to the police. Hayashi asked the police. Yamamoto confirmed his words and suggested filing a report against her boyfriend. After all, if a case was opened against him, he wouldn't be able to go near Hayashi, right? Yamamoto continued, saying that he wanted to say that it would be safe for her, but she asked him to wait. Did he really think it was necessary to take it that far? The guy parried and calmly reminded her that her boyfriend had beaten her to a pulp, forced her to break off all contact with everyone, and caused Hayashi's parents to disown her. He smashed her phone and isolated her from society so she couldn't run away from him. The girl listened silently, nodding. Yamamoto continued and asked if, after all that, she really didn't want to go to the police. Hayashi was silent, as was Yamamoto. She clutched the pillow under her knees, clearly nervous. The guy clarified that she had decided to break up with her boyfriend, right? The girl replied that breaking up was one thing, but reporting it to the police was another. Yamamoto looked away, upset by her words. He told her that she didn't have to do it, and Hayashi asked him if it was really okay. He said he didn't mind, because in the end, He was just offering options. Even though it seemed like the best way out of the situation to him, Hayashi might think differently. And if she didn't agree with something, she should say so right away. When the girl agreed with what he said, Yamamoto added that he had a request for her. He said sternly and seriously that she should not treat his words as absolute truth. And when Hayashi wanted to interrupt him, he continued, saying that if she didn't like something, she should say so, because that way they would reach a solution to the problem more quickly. Hayashi asked him to speak more simply, and Yamamoto retorted, asking if he had to spell everything out to her like a child. Yamamoto summed up that they weren't going to the police, and if she didn't like the idea, then so be it. Hayashi replied that he could have said so right away. The guy continued talking, telling her that she would have to stay with him for a while. Hayashi was surprised by this. Covering her body with her hands, she snorted. So that's what all this was for? The guy didn't understand what she meant. Hayashi twisted her face in contempt and insulted Yamamoto, who just shouted indignantly, "What are you talking about?" He explained to her that she had nowhere to go anyway because her boyfriend was at home, and he was sure that he was looking for her like crazy right now. Hayashi shuddered at the realization of the situation. Yamamoto advised her not to leave the apartment for the time being, which was exactly what he meant. The girl understood. He continued, telling her that he needed something from her, even though she didn't want to do it. Hayashi asked him to repeat himself, but it was clear from her eyes that she understood. And Yamamoto thought that since she had figured it out herself, it would be easier. She pressed her hands to her chest. She agreed. After all, he was helping her. Yamamoto thought, and realized that she had misunderstood everything again, while the girl looked at him from under her eyelashes. And she continued, in other words, so he wants full access to her body? Hayashi looked at him angrily, saying this with indignation. The guy knew she had misunderstood him, and asked her not to talk nonsense. The girl wondered what nonsense he was talking about. Yamamoto thought about how she had clung to him herself yesterday before bed. So was it okay for her once, but not on a regular basis? Maybe she was mad that people treated her like an object? Yeah, that's probably it. While Yamamoto was thinking about all this, Hayashi glared at him, growling. He sighed. He asked her not to agree to anything she didn't like, and that he was talking about something else anyway. She asked what he was talking about then, and Yamamoto pointed to the bruises on her arm. He said they would go to the hospital. Hayashi said, right, that's it. The girl was a little embarrassed and quietly said that she understood him. Yamamoto just wondered why she was upset, and he believes that he will never understand what this queen is thinking. At the hospital, the medical report showed bruises all over her body and torn ligaments in her wrist. Yamamoto and Hayashi walked from the hospital. He glanced at her from time to time, but she was looking ahead, staring into space. He remembered the conversation between the doctor and Hayashi, how he wanted to clarify the cause of the bruises, and she said that everything was fine and thanked him. He thought that yes, they now had a report in their hands. But she avoided all the doctor's questions and tried to finish as quickly as possible. It seemed she was still hiding details because of her boyfriend, but should Yamamoto continue to remain silent? It's probably better not to mention it to him. She's clearly not ready to write a statement. Yamamoto called her, and when she responded, he asked her if she was hot in that outfit. Hayashi replied that it was a bit warm. He asked her if she was hot in that outfit. Hayashi replied that it was okay. The guy offered to go and buy her something, some change of clothes, and thought, well, let her keep quiet about the guy. The main thing is that he is ready to help her if she changes her mind. Hayashi was worried that she didn't have any money, but Yamamoto reassured her, saying that he had a little, but he wouldn't buy her everything. Hayashi promised anxiously that she would pay him back, but she didn't know when. But the guy interrupted her, smiled, and said she could pay him back when she could. They went shopping and looked at clothes. When Hayashi looked at bras, Yamamoto turned away and waved her off. Morning came. The birds were chirping, and Hayashi was asleep. Yamamoto got up with a groan of pain in his back. He thought it was time to buy a futon. He also had some free time before university, so he would do some cleaning. While he was thinking, he looked back at Hayashi. And in the end, he decided to make breakfast. Hayashi rolled over in bed while the food was cooking. Yamamoto left her breakfast on the table with a note saying it was for her and thought she should sleep in while she was here. He also thought about how unusual it was for him to skip his morning cleaning since his only hobby was cleaning. Yamamoto was returning from school, thinking that he had finally bought a futon and would be able to sleep comfortably. He could smell food from outside, and when he opened the door to his room, he announced that he was home. Hayashi was standing at the stove in an apron with her hair tied back in a ponytail, cooking something, and she said, "Welcome back." Yamamoto praised himself in his mind for buying a hair tie. She asked if he liked burger steak. The guy replied that she didn't have to cook. He would make something when he got back. Hayashi countered that he was hiding her, and this was the least she could do to repay him. She flipped the piece of meat. Yamamoto said it turned out well. Hayashi said it was all thanks to practice. And she asked again if he liked burger steaks or not. Yamamoto said he was fine with them. Hayashi smiled cheerfully, holding the plate in her hands, and said that his answer was evasive. While she was putting food on the plates and he was unpacking the futon, she called him, and when he responded, she said she wanted to discuss something after dinner, and he replied positively. And then he thought, wait a minute, did he buy ground beef? Hayashi let her hair down. They wished each other bon appetit. Yamamoto tried the burger steak, and Hayashi asked his opinion. He said it was delicious. The girl was pleased. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and they continued eating. Hayashi started to clear the table. Yamamoto said he would wash the dishes, but the girl told him to sit down and said she wanted to move around a bit, so she would do everything. Yamamoto said nothing, and while Hayashi was washing the dishes, he asked seriously if she had left the house today. He immediately thought that he had asked that as if he were a jealous guy. That wasn't what he meant, it was just… Hayashi cut him off with, so what? Yamamoto remained silent. He continued that it was nothing, and that it was up to her whether she listened to him or not. It would be very unwise to just go out on the street and run into her ex. The girl's mood darkened. She asked what he understood at all. He replied that of course he didn't understand anything. Hayashi abruptly asked why he had said that then. But when she saw Yamamoto sitting quietly, she fell silent and finished washing the dishes. She sat down next to him. She apologized for being stubborn. Yamamoto countered that it was his fault. He thought that dinner was entirely his responsibility and that he should have discussed it with her in the morning. Hayashi said he had nothing to apologize for. Yamamoto asked where she got the money for the ground beef. She replied that she had spent the rest of the money her ex-boyfriend had given her. Hayashi went on to say how she had run to the store and thought that if Yamamoto saw that she was gone, he would get angry. He was puzzled. The girl understood this. She went on to explain that her ex-boyfriend was annoyed by practically everything, and as soon as he was in a bad mood, he would start picking on everything. Hayashi said that she could just throw away the trash that was lying on the floor, but her boyfriend would start yelling at her for doing it without permission, and when she asked him why, he would immediately grumble, saying why was she asking such absurd questions? But when they ate, it was quiet, and that was the only time she could relax. Yamamoto listened to her attentively. She went on to explain that this was why she decided to go to the store and cook dinner at the same time, thinking that Yamamoto wouldn't get upset during the meal and wouldn't scold her for leaving the house. Yamamoto asked again why. Hayashi said that this was what she wanted to discuss after dinner, that she wanted to find a part-time job. Yamamoto tensed up. He said it was a good idea, but not now. Hayashi replied that she thought he would say that. Yamamoto asked if she really needed a job so urgently and why now. Hayashi nervously tugged at the sleeve of her t-shirt, her eyes downcast, and said that without money, she was just a burden to Yamamoto, who was surprised by her words. The girl continued, saying that she would pay him back everything he had spent on her, but she didn't know when, and most likely, with her, his savings would quickly disappear. She didn't want to cause him any problems. Yamamoto paused. He replied that he understood Hayashi's concern, but if something happened, he wouldn't be able to help. Did she understand that? Hayashi lowered her gaze. She replied that there was no other way. The guy asked, is there really no other way? Hayashi calmly replied that yes. There was nothing she could do about it. That was all she could do now. Even if he ended up finding her, there was no other way. Yamamoto was stunned by her words. He thought, what does there is no other way mean? Any risk can be avoided. What is she talking about? They sat across from each other, and Yamamoto thought he really didn't understand her. Avoiding risk was very easy. Just don't leave the house until everything settles down and nothing else is required. The girl sat calmly with a slight smile. Even Hayashi should understand that, he thought. But exposing herself to danger like this was akin to masochism. Could she really have done all this for him? Hayashi lowered her eyes. She stood up and looked at her bruises. Yamamoto continued to ponder the fact that Hayashi was a victim of domestic violence, not only physical, but also psychological. Who would have thought that this strong-willed queen would end up in such a helpless state? After all, it had only been 4 months since graduation, and Yamamoto had entered university 3 months ago. Hayashi had met her boyfriend even later, and they had only recently started living together. What did her boyfriend do to her in such a short period of time? Yamamoto opened the bank app on his phone and asked Hayashi to take a look. He showed her that he had 1,500,000 yen in his wallet. He told her how he started working part-time while still in school, which is why he had saved so much, and that he hardly ever buys anything. He showed Hayashi his budget calculations. Yamamoto explained that he gets money from his scholarship and his job as a cashier, and his parents pay his rent. He confirmed that his scholarship was hardly a source of income. But even so, he managed to save something every month, so his expenses would only increase for food. And since she would pay him back anyway, he didn't see any problem with it. nor did he see any reason why Hayashi needed a part-time job so badly. The girl reminded him that it was his money and only he could spend it, but Yamamoto countered that this was precisely why he was willing to spend it on Hayashi. In response, she told him that he had no reason to do so, and when Yamamoto said that he did have a reason, Hayashi snapped, saying that he was lying. The guy replied that he wasn't lying, and the girl got angry that he was lying anyway. They fell silent. Hayashi continued to say that he was lying, that she had nothing now, that he got nothing out of her being there. And considering the trouble he could get into because of her, he had no reason to keep her there. She hugged herself, her face reflecting despair and self-loathing. Yes, she had nothing left, she concluded. Yamamoto looked at her intently. He suspected, of course, that she was not so eager to work for his sake. Although perhaps to some extent, it was for him. The reason she wanted to work so badly, despite all the possible risks, was that she wanted to regain her lost dignity, he thought, and replied to Hayashi that he had a reason to keep her there. It was because she wanted to regain her lost dignity, he thought, and replied to Hayashi that he had a reason to keep her here. She flew into a rage again, saying he was lying, but he replied that this was not the case at all. He explained to her that she was now doing all the housework, and Hayashi listened attentively. He continued that he could do the housework himself, but because of work and school, household chores often get put off, so he was grateful for her help. The girl didn't believe that this was the only reason he was keeping her there and called him unintelligent if that was really the reason. Yamamoto countered that he was a meticulous person. Yamamoto explained that if he found even a little dust on the TV, he would clean the entire room, and if there was even a trace of limescale in the washing machine, he would clean the entire drum. As Hayashi listened, he continued that on top of that, he had university and a part-time job, and he exclaimed emotionally that he simply didn't have enough time for it. The girl asked if that meant she would have to do the cleaning. Yamamoto exclaimed that it was just the opposite. He clarified that he would take care of all the cleaning. The girl didn't understand him. She asked why. Were there things here that couldn't be touched? But Yamamoto replied enthusiastically and decisively that there weren't any, that cleaning was just his hobby, his reason for living. Hayashi was astonished. Yamamoto went on to say that if she took care of everything else, he could focus on cleaning, which would be a good reason for him to lend her money. Hayashi just wanted to say that this reason was silly. But Yamamoto interrupted her, answering her long-standing question about whether the burger steak was delicious. Hayashi was a little embarrassed by the compliment. She asked, what was that all about? She warned him that it could cause him problems, and Yamamoto asked if she was unintelligent. In a shared life, there are always problems. Hayashi paused for a moment, then said that she wouldn't look for a part-time job after all, and Yamamoto suggested leaving everything as it was for now. Hayashi called the guy by name when he responded. She offered to start making him bento lunches for university. Yamamoto didn't understand why she wanted to do that, and asked her why. Hayashi said that to save money, she would make bento for both of them. Yamamoto understood her. He thought that it would be much cheaper than going to the university cafeteria, because he didn't want to spend extra money. He said that was certainly a good idea, but would she make it every day? Hayashi agreed. Then she awkwardly began to ask a question when Yamamoto responded. The girl twirled a strand of hair around her finger and shyly asked him to tell her what he liked. Yamamoto's heart skipped 2 beats, his eyes widened, and he was surprised by the question. He clutched his heart and was equally surprised as to why it had skipped a beat. He asked himself, what was that just now? It was the 3rd day of hiding Hayashi Megumi. Yamamoto woke up with the wonderful feeling that nothing hurt anymore, and he exclaimed in his mind that futons were just great. The guy looked at the time on his phone and decided not to wake Hayashi, but he wanted to clean up and wondered where he could do so without making too much noise. He started tidying up the bathroom. An hour later, Hayashi woke up, yawned, and wished Yamamoto good morning. He wished her good morning too, and continued cleaning the floor tiles of the already sparkling bathroom. Hayashi remarked aloud that she had thought about it yesterday, but Yamamoto gets up too early. Hayashi squeezed out some toothpaste and brushed her teeth. She asked him if he always got up so early. Yamamoto replied that he did, more or less. The girl remarked that he had also woken up early yesterday, and he reminded her that she had just told him that, but she didn't believe him. While Hayashi was rinsing her mouth, Yamamoto wondered why she wasn't awake yet. Hayashi remarked aloud that, come to think of it, he was always the first to arrive at school, and Yamamoto, vaguely remembering this, replied that it seemed to be true. Hayashi told him he was strange. Was the guy surprised just because he got up early? The girl told him to sit down while she made breakfast, and he agreed. He watched TV for a while. Then he went back to Hayashi, and she asked him what was wrong. He asked her to give him some plates. Hayashi asked why. Yamamoto reminded her that it was his apartment, and she was a guest there, and the girl said she would bring them herself. The guy wouldn't let up, and asked again so she wouldn't have to strain herself. She retorted, asking how she could possibly strain herself. It's easy, said Yamamoto. Hayashi glared at the guy, said irritably that he was annoying her, and ordered him to shut up and sit back down. The guy wondered why she was angry. What did he step on, he wondered. Yamamoto thanked her for breakfast. He said he needed to change clothes and asked if she could leave for a minute. Hayashi casually told him to change right there. The guy thought he had asked so that she wouldn't have to look at him in his underwear. While she was washing the dishes, he thought that since she lived with her boyfriend, she wouldn't be embarrassed by his naked body. He went to the bathroom, telling Hayashi that he would change there. He should have done that right away, he thought. He pulled off his t-shirt. He opened the washing machine, and right on top of all the clothes were women's panties. Hayashi abruptly opened the bathroom door and announced that the bento was ready. Yamamoto cried out in surprise and embarrassment and jumped up. Hayashi looked at him, and he thanked her. She asked what he was doing. The guy replied that he was getting changed. She asked why he screamed. He explained that she had opened the door abruptly. The girl wanted to ask another question, but Yamamoto asked her to be quiet, feeling awkward in such a situation. The girl smiled slyly. With a sly smile, she asked if that meant he was afraid she would see him naked. So what, the guy asked. Hayashi said with the same cheerful attitude that she didn't mind appearing naked to him at all. Yamamoto asked what kind of competition this was. She laughed in response. He said he was going to class and thanked her for the bento. Hayashi, already smiling, said she had put his favorite Kinpira gobo in it. Yamamoto thanked her, a little embarrassed. He told her that he was also working today, so he would be home late, and she replied that she understood. He just sighed heavily. Hayashi asked why he was sighing so heavily. The guy replied that he had thought about it and didn't want to go to work. The girl remarked aloud in surprise that someone like him was complaining about work when she thought he took everything seriously. Yamamoto clarified that even if he sometimes didn't feel like going to work, it didn't mean he was taking it lightly. He noted that sometimes it was, of course, a pain, and they could pay more. Hayashi found this amusing. He asked her what was so funny. She replied that he was saying that they paid peanuts, and he didn't want to work. But at the same time, he is always happy to help her. Yamamoto agreed and noted that she was a good cook. She agreed with that. The guy said he was leaving, and Hayashi wished him a good day. Yamamoto noted that the rain had stopped, and it looked like it was going to be another hot day. Standing in the subway, he thought again. The situation was not ideal. And to be honest, he did not think that time would solve all of Hayashi's problems. In fact, things could only get worse. If Hayashi ended up running into her boyfriend, he would most likely be much angrier than he was now. And if Hayashi returned to him, she would face even more deprivation and beatings. And the more time passed, the harder it would be to go to the police. He imagined an officer asking about the time that had passed since the beatings. What? Several months ago. Why didn't they come forward sooner? Such thoughts made Yamamoto think even more deeply. But he still believed that the police were the best way out of the situation. But he had already messed up. He shouldn't have gone along with Hayashi, and if he asked her again, she would resist. But if he didn't ask her, then what? Yamamoto looked at the girls in the group. The girl in the center stood out, with her short bob haircut and floral dress. It was Kasahara Akari, Hayashi's former classmate and best friend. Yamamoto thought that Kasahara would be much easier to convince Hayashi, but even though he attended the same university as her, he had never spoken to her. And even if Kasahara was friends with Hayashi's boyfriend, he couldn't just bring up Hayashi like that. Yamamoto wondered what he should do. Yamamoto watched from the back rows as Kasahara chatted with another girl. He remembered. At school, she was in the upper echelons. Among the boys, she was even more popular than the strong-willed Queen Hayashi. And he, despite his appearance, was still a thorn in her side. Yamamoto remembered how a girl cried because of him, which led to him being called disgusting, or how he accidentally bumped into another girl, and she screamed that he was annoying. He remembered constantly making people cry and hearing a lot of insults directed at him. He and Kasahara, for some reason, he felt that he wouldn't be able to talk to her calmly. He sighed. He realized that it was impossible and decided it would be better to come up with another plan. People in the university cafeteria were eating, making noise, and chatting. Yamamoto unpacked his bento. He saw an octopus-shaped sausage. He was surprised that the queen had gone to the trouble of making octopus-shaped sausages. He found it pleasantly amusing. He began his meal, noting that it was delicious. By nightfall, before going home, he realized that he still hadn't come up with anything, but there had to be a solution. When he got home, Yamamoto told Hayashi that he was home. She replied, "Welcome back." She also said that she would heat up dinner. The guy was surprised and agreed. Hayashi told him to take a bath, and he said he would go now. He saw his clothes neatly folded on the bed. The bath was at the perfect temperature. When he came out, Hayashi announced that dinner was ready. Yamamoto couldn't help but notice with surprise that she was pampering him. Hayashi didn't understand what he meant. He explained that she had done so much for his arrival. The girl noted that this used to be normal for her, and Yamamoto thought that it would be better if she didn't remember how things used to be so often, because he no longer knew how to react to it. Hayashi told him that. By the way, she admitted that she was surprised. She noted that even though he asked her not to clean up, she still wanted to, but here's the thing. Hayashi remarked that everything was clean to a shine. It was almost frightening. Yamamoto confirmed that it seemed to be true and remarked that it turned out she really didn't know how to clean a house. Hayashi asked why he was so surprised. The guy said it wasn't that he was surprised. The girl asked, then what? Yamamoto simply replied that he hadn't expected it. That's all. Hayashi replied that that's what he said. After thinking for a moment, she said that maybe he should thank her ex-boyfriend. Yamamoto remained silent. With a sigh, Yamamoto asked her to rest more while he was there. Wasn't that why they had started all this? Hayashi asked why he was scolding her. The guy was amused and replied that it was a good question. The girl sighed and remarked that he could at least pretend to be grateful. Yamamoto countered that he appreciated her housework, but that it was unnecessary since she was a guest here. She interrupted him rudely, noting that she didn't even have time to get tired. Hayashi looked at him with a frown and anger. Yamamoto wondered why she was looking at him that way and asked if she could spend less time doing housework. The girl asked if she could ask him a question. The guy replied that he was listening. Hayashi began to say that if someone stays with him and he asks them to help with the housework, will he then be upset that everything is not done the way he wanted? Yamamoto replied that if someone asks someone else to do something, they should be prepared for the fact that not everything will be done exactly as they want, and if they don't like something, they should do it themselves. Hayashi clarified that maybe he actually didn't like her cooking, but he wasn't saying anything about it. The guy rejected these words and said that everything was delicious. He went on to say that he just didn't want her to overexert herself and asked her not to wait for him to have dinner, that she could start without him. She said that if she ate dinner without him, she would have to watch him eat. Yamamoto asked what was wrong with that. Hayashi said that if she watched, she would just get hungry again. The guy thought about it. Was that the only reason? Hayashi sighed and said that she understood what he meant. She didn't agree with him, but she heard him. But she wouldn't do less housework. Yamamoto asked why. The girl cut him off sharply, retorting that she was just bored to death. The guy remembered that her phone had been broken, so he told her to watch TV. She retorted that there was nothing to watch. Yamamoto had a sudden realization and asked her to wait. Yamamoto climbed into the cabinet under the TV and took something out, and immediately wiped it down. He handed it to her and told her to hold it. Hayashi was surprised and asked, what? The guy explained that it was his old tablet. She asked if she could really have it. He said of course she could take it. He had a new one. The girl looked at the gadget in surprise. Yamamoto asked her again not to get too caught up in housework and to remember to spend time on the internet. Hayashi found this amusing and asked rhetorically if it wasn't usually the other way around, since you shouldn't spend too much time on the internet and should remember to do your chores. The guy decided to ignore this and handed her the tablet. The girl silently took it in her hands. A smile reappeared on her face. Hayashi hugged the tablet to her chest and thanked Yamamoto with an embarrassed smile. The guy was slightly embarrassed by this. Later, he gave her the charger. The girl enthusiastically said that she would use the tablet as soon as she washed the dishes. He offered to wash them himself, but she cut him off and told him to go watch TV. The guy watched her as she enthusiastically washed the dishes. This brought a slight smile to Yamamoto's face. After a while, Hayashi was already lying on the bed with her tablet, and she called out to Yamamoto, who was sitting and watching TV, and he responded. She said she would return the tablet to him in 10 minutes, and he asked why exactly 10 minutes? Hayashi fell sharply onto the bed, which again raised questions for him. And then he was suddenly struck by shock. The tablet screen had bookmarks open with adult content, which greatly embarrassed Yamamoto. He realized that he hadn't deleted anything, and he felt ashamed. He quietly said he was sorry. He continued to delete them one by one, sitting there embarrassed. Hayashi called him again, and he responded. Hayashi looked at him slyly and cheekily, swinging her legs, firmly saying that he had needs too. She found it very amusing. Yamamoto exclaimed that she shouldn't tease him. He became more and more embarrassed. Yamamoto simply pressed his head against the tablet, looking as if he would melt from embarrassment, and Hayashi, unable to resist, began to laugh loudly, holding her stomach and swinging her legs. Deciding to tease him again, she asked what kind of actress he liked. Yamamoto cried out again, embarrassed and awkward, that he had told her everything. It was the fourth day of Hayashi Megumi's hiding. Yamamoto was cleaning the windowsills with a brush. He cried out in admiration at how much dirt had accumulated. Remembering that he was not alone, he quickly closed his mouth. He turned toward Hayashi. She slowly got up from the bed and mumbled, and turned to him. Hayashi sleepily wished him good morning. Yamamoto also wished her good morning and apologized for waking her up, feeling guilty about it. Hayashi sleepily asked why he had shouted. The guy explained that he was cleaning up. The dirt came off instantly. The girl listened to him while trying to wake up completely. He continued, saying that he was delighted and couldn't help but cry out. Hayashi said she understood. He asked what she understood. The girl said that when something excites him, he starts screaming. The guy was stunned by her words. And as she walked to the bathroom, he thought it sounded somewhat ambiguous. Hayashi opened the bathroom door and apologized for oversleeping. And while she was putting her hair in a ponytail, she clarified that she had just been up late on her tablet. Already sitting at the table and eating breakfast, Yamamoto said he was glad she had distracted herself. Hayashi agreed. He asked what she had been doing and asked her to tell him if it wasn't a secret. The girl said she was watching videos. The guy asked what kind of videos she was watching. The girl enthusiastically picked up the tablet and offered to show him. The guy remained silent and thought that she had recently told him that it was rude to sit on your phone while eating. In the video, the couple decided to splurge on an expensive restaurant to celebrate their anniversary. But they were refused service, even though they were dressed appropriately. The waiter thought the couple looked poorly dressed and apologized, telling them that it was a luxury restaurant and he was afraid they would not be able to serve them. The couple shared this story with the manager of a restaurant they frequent. He was outraged, saying how could this have happened? It turned out that the manager had previously been the head chef at the same restaurant. He exclaimed that he would not forgive this. He confronted the manager at the restaurant and asked if he even knew who he was hiring. The manager apologized sheepishly. After that, the rude waiter was fired. The hashtags under the video were about karma, instant karma, and justice. Yamamoto watched the video awkwardly while Hayashi eagerly awaited his reaction. She asked him if he thought the video was cool. The guy said yes. He thought he couldn't say it was boring, but he didn't really like videos like that. Yamamoto continued to think that the whole plot of such videos is based on the fact that the heroes are defended by an authority figure. And it's not bad to accept someone's help, but why in none of these videos can the hero stand up for himself? They just complain, and someone stands up for them, and the heroes have no responsibility. Yamamoto continued to think that he was annoyed by such simple stories, in which everything boils down to one thing. And he noticed that Hayashi had a whole history of views on similar videos. The girl happily asked him what he liked best. The guy didn't expect her to seriously ask what he liked. Hayashi clarified that she meant which moment caught his attention. She was referring to the video, and with sparkling eyes, she waited for his answer. This put Yamamoto in an awkward position, and he remained silent, thinking about how to respond. Hayashi called out to him, and he responded. Now the girl asked if he liked the video. Yamamoto didn't want to admit it, seeing how happy she was. The guy said no, he just thought the waiter didn't know how to work with people and that he was unintelligent. Yamamoto wondered if Hayashi believed his words. The girl laughed a little and agreed with the guy. He noticed that he had gotten away with it. He told her that she shouldn't spend too much time on her tablet, because normal sleep is important for health. The girl agreed. A while later, they were standing at the front door, and Yamamoto reminded her that he wasn't working today, so he would be home early. Hayashi agreed and wished him a good day. As Yamamoto walked down the road, he thought that Hayashi probably wanted to punish her ex deep down. If that was why she was watching all those videos, then maybe he could convince her to file a complaint after all. Yamamoto didn't want to complain to someone else so that they would solve the problem for him. He wanted Hayashi Megumi to take the first step herself. Yamamoto was curious about where Hayashi was now and what he was doing. It had been 4 days since his girlfriend had not returned home, and most likely, her ex was looking for her. The sooner they figured this out, the better, so he couldn't do without Kasahara's help. Yamamoto sighed. He made up his mind. He didn't talk to her yesterday, but he would definitely do so today. In the end, the day at university passed, and Yamamoto still couldn't find Kasahara. The guy was upset. The day had not been productive. Yamamoto walked home, sighing and thinking that he only saw Kasahara in French class, so that was his progress. When he got home, he saw that the light in his room was off. He was surprised by this and wondered why it was off. Yamamoto's heart pounded loudly, and out of fear, he rushed to the house. He remembered that Hayashi had recently left the house to go to the store. He recalled their conversation and was afraid that her ex might have seen her then. He ran up the stairs, thinking that her ex might have tracked down where they lived. He thought about Hayashi, breathing heavily. Yamamoto's mind was filled with worries about Hayashi. He quickly turned the keys, and he opened the door abruptly. The apartment was quiet and dark. He took off his shoes and went to the bed. There he saw Hayashi sleeping. She was snoring her sleep. Yamamoto sighed and quietly noted that she was just asleep. Hayashi was snoring a little in her sleep, and Yamamoto noticed that too. He looked at her with a slight smile and sighed with relief. The guy saw the laundry hanging out to dry and thought that he should bring it all in. The girl mumbled something as she woke up. Hayashi jumped up abruptly, cried out, and asked him to forgive her. Yamamoto apologized for waking her up. The girl got up stumbled and started to fall, but the guy caught her. He asked if she was hurt. Hayashi was embarrassed by the whole situation. Yamamoto said she shouldn't jump up so suddenly. She asked him to be quiet. Hayashi knelt down and began to fold her clothes in a hurry. Yamamoto asked her not to rush. The girl apologized, lowering her head to the floor. She continued, saying that they had agreed that she would do the housework. She looked up at him with a worried expression and said that she had started slacking off right away. Yamamoto told her that nothing terrible had happened, but Hayashi thought otherwise. They were silent for a while. The guy called her and asked why she hadn't done any housework. The girl replied that she had been on her tablet at night and had fallen asleep during the day because of it. He asked if she had been sitting up all night, and she confirmed that she had. The guy explained to her that it was simple then, so she shouldn't stay up so late anymore. Hayashi was surprised by his statement, her eyes widening. Yamamoto explained that if there was a problem, he should resolve it, otherwise nothing would change. Hayashi asked if he was angry. He asked if he should be angry. It's just clothing. Hayashi looked at the floor, tried to say something, but remained silent. Yamamoto saw her mood. He asked if she knew what he was going to say to her. She asked what? Yamamoto looked seriously into her eyes and said that a mistake was not the end of the world. The girl looked at him in surprise. He continued, asking if she thought that if she slept all day and did nothing around the house, someone would die. But nothing like that would happen. It was all nonsense. Yamamoto asked her to stop worrying if she understood him. Hayashi said she wouldn't stay up late anymore, and the guy said that was all. The girl thanked him shyly and remarked that he was very reasonable. Then she added that it was even a little creepy. He said that was hurtful. Did she want him to get angry? Hayashi laughed and said she was joking and that she would make dinner now. The guy agreed. While she was cooking, she quietly said that this was probably what life together should look like for lovers. Yamamoto didn't hear her and asked her to repeat what she said. The girl said nothing. She just thought that they should have talked more often at school. Yamamoto replied that it was good that she realized it now, but the girl didn't quite understand, and he continued to say that he thought so too. Hayashi was pleased to hear this and felt a little embarrassed. She smiled and said yes. If they had talked more at school, maybe their school life would have been better, but there was no point in regretting the past. A mistake is not the end of the world. Life had brought them together again, and they could start over. While they were eating, Hayashi asked what he wanted her to cook for tomorrow. Yamamoto said anything was fine. Hayashi was indignant at this answer and said that he couldn't have given a worse answer. Yamamoto asked what was wrong with his answer, and she confirmed that it was terrible. Hadn't his parents taught him how to answer questions? She asked him never to say that to anyone again, which surprised the guy, and he agreed. While Hayashi was eating, he thought to himself that, come to think of it, his mother had said the same thing to him. But he also noticed that all of Hayashi's dishes were exceptionally delicious, so he was ready to eat anything. It was the 5th day of Hayashi Megumi's hiding. The dining room was noisy, and the guy thought again that Hayashi had changed. While Yamamoto was looking for a place to sit, he thought that maybe Hayashi would even listen to him, because if she wrote a statement about her ex, they would both feel better. He also noticed that there were no seats available. Seeing that someone had simply left a bag on a chair, he realized that they didn't even want to talk to him. Then someone grabbed him by the back of his shirt and called him. Turning around, Yamamoto saw Kasahara, who asked him if he knew where to sit. The guy was surprised and called out her name. She smiled gently and said she had a seat here and invited him to sit down. Kasahara pointed to the empty seats and invited him to sit down. Yamamoto wanted to wave it off, saying that it wasn't necessary, that a spot would open up somewhere soon. The girl waved her hand, saying that it was okay, that they should help each other in times of trouble, because that was the right thing to do. Yamamoto sat down, agreeing with her. He told her that they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Kasahara agreed. She called him over and asked if he was avoiding her. Yamamoto said that he hadn't really had a reason to talk to her. Kasahara asked him if he really needed a reason to talk to her. The guy replied that he was just that kind of person, and she knew that very well. She confirmed this. They sat in silence for a while. Then Yamamoto asked her if maybe she should have started the conversation herself. She said she had, and he agreed. Yamamoto thanked her again for the seat. Kasahara said, "You're welcome, and I'm always happy to help you." He thought that her words could be misunderstood again, and asked her what was wrong. Kasahara didn't understand the question. He explained that she herself wanted to talk to him about something. The girl fell silent. Kasahara turned to him, called him over, and asked if he remembered Hayashi Megumi. Yamamoto was surprised by this question. He replied that he did, because he and Kasahara were close and always making noise. The girl repeated his words, making noise, that is. The girl continued and asked if he knew that Hayashi had also moved to Tokyo. He agreed, and she asked again if he had run into her by chance. Yamamoto remained silent. He wondered why she was asking. Was Kasahara also looking for Hayashi, and why? Could it be that Hayashi's ex had asked Kasahara to find her? And how did Hayashi meet her ex in the first place? Through social media, dating, or through Kasahara? If it was the latter, then he needed to be more careful now. Kasahara called him, and the guy snapped out of his thoughts. Just as he was about to say something, someone approached them and asked Kasahara who was sitting with her. The girl asked if he was an acquaintance. Kasahara greeted her by name. Irene noted that the cafeteria was crowded today, and again asked who was sitting next to her friend. Kasahara replied that it was Yamamoto. She joked that he was her boyfriend. The guy sighed, confirming that her jokes were not very funny. Irene noted that she had seen him in French class. She also said that he was constantly being praised for his perfect test scores. Yamamoto confirmed that this was true. The girl playfully asked if he was busy today and asked him to help her with her studies. The guy was surprised. The girl pressed her chest against his arm. This made him wonder why she was doing this. Kasahara interrupted them, noticing that he had a third class today, and asked him if she was right. Yamamoto nodded, wondering how she knew that. Irene pretended to be upset. Then she looked at his bento and asked in surprise if he knew how to cook. Kasahara noted that he had an exemplary bento, and he agreed. And he continued eating. Yamamoto thought that he couldn't say that Hayashi had made it. And as a result, there was no progress again today if he could check Kasahara's intentions. He stopped himself in his thoughts, realizing that he could simply ask Hayashi how she met her ex and whether it was related to Kasahara. Once he got home, he announced his arrival. Hayashi was cooking dinner and cheerfully said, "Welcome home." But the girl frowned sharply and looked at him reproachfully. Yamamoto called out to her, asking what was wrong. She asked if he had been seeing a girl. He asked what she was talking about. He thought about it and realized that he hadn't been seeing anyone, or maybe he had, remembering how he had been sitting with Kasahara and Irene. But why was Hayashi asking? Maybe he smelled like someone else's perfume? Hayashi confirmed her guesses. The guy replied that yes, he did, but he didn't understand what the big deal was. The girl clenched her fists, and with a shout, she asked why he was dating some girl. Yamamoto was taken aback by the question. He shouted back, asking what difference it made to her. After all, there was nothing between them. Hayashi agreed with this, lowering her head to the floor. She said that she was just a stranger to him, and it wasn't her place to decide who he saw. Whoever he chose, she was sure that the other girl would be smarter and nicer than her. Yamamoto didn't understand what she was talking about. Hayashi continued to say that it had all been strange from the beginning, and she took off her apron. And she let down her hair, saying that, as he had said, there was nothing between them. But she lives here with him, and it's all strange. There was nothing between them, and she was cooking for him. Yamamoto thought that she had misunderstood everything again. He reached out to her, asking her to listen. In tears, Hayashi shouted for him not to touch her. The girl opened the front door and ran down the stairs. Yamamoto didn't understand what was happening and called out to her. Hayashi ran down the dark street, her breath uneven and slowed from running to walking. She walked and tried to catch her breath. There were no more tears in her eyes, and she looked down. Hayashi stopped and wondered what she was doing. Looking at her feet, she wondered why she had done that. Clenching her fists, Hayashi remembered how she had scolded him. She remembered smelling citrus perfume on him, and it drove her crazy. She got very angry and couldn't stand it. She just couldn't. She held her head and sighed. Hayashi stood there and remembered how kind he had been to her, thinking about how he had taken her in, offered her a helping hand, and in the end, tears began to well up in Hayashi's eyes. She wondered what she should do now. How stupid she had been. What a fool she was. Yamamoto had been so kind to her. She wondered if he was angry now, or if, on the contrary, he was glad to be rid of the problem. And again, she wondered what she should do now. She didn't want Yamamoto to hate her. She hugged herself and thought about how she didn't want him to hate her, that she didn't know what to do now and didn't understand anything. Hayashi bowed her head, crouching down, and mentally asked Yamamoto to help her. Someone stomped behind her, and she heard it, thinking it was Yamamoto. She jumped up, ready to call out to him. In front of her stood the guy who had called her name. Just seeing him made Hayashi tremble with fear and breathe heavily. She called him by his name, Seiji, and he called her name back, asking with anger on his face where she had been all this time. Hayashi felt intense fear and shock. She met Seiji after entering college at a group date, to which her club mates invited her. All the guys were financiers from large companies, so the other girls literally hung on their every word. Hayashi thought that such dates were not to her liking, but she had just moved to Tokyo and needed to make some acquaintances. One of the girls told her that she could sit with anyone she wanted later, but Hayashi didn't care either way. A guy spoke up, asking permission to introduce himself. He introduced himself as Seiji Utsumi. Hayashi listened silently. He was handsome, completely harmless, an ordinary guy. That was the impression he made on Hayashi. She noted to herself that he was a financier. Surely such rich people see the world in a completely different way. Hayashi remembered her life at work, when she was constantly short of money to live on. She had moved to Tokyo on one condition. Her father would pay for her studies, but not a penny more. She didn't care, as long as she could get away from her strict and hated father, remembering moments when she argued with him, how he wouldn't let her go out. She broke free from the oppression and even had free time, but she had money problems and often had only bread for dinner. Against the backdrop of all this routine, her dates with Seiji seemed so unusual. Hayashi rode with him in his car to the sea. There, he asked her to move in with him. She thought that if someone said she did it only for the money, they would be right, and that was probably why she was punished. Seiji asked why dinner was store-bought food. He told her she had no taste at all. After a while, he accused her of doing nothing but lying around all day. Later, he apologized, saying that she must have been hurt, and asked if she would forgive him. He promised that it would never happen again. Hayashi hugged herself, covered in abrasions and bruises. After a while, he told her that her cooking had improved, because before, her food was inedible. Hayashi saw him off to work, and when he said he was leaving, she wished him a good day. As soon as the door slammed shut, the girl fell to her knees on the floor. It was getting dark. She thought about how she was afraid that Seiji would come back, and she was scared. Leaving the house, she thought she couldn't go on like this, but she had nowhere to go. She wondered what she should do. She walked to the store, and there she saw Yamamoto. She decided that it was then that fate had brought her back together with him. 5 days had passed since she met Yamamoto. Seiji called her and asked where she had been all this time. He looked down at her with irritation on his face. Hayashi was silent. She was scared. Seiji reached out to her, saying that it didn't matter anymore. The main thing was that he had found her. He said he was worried about her. The girl lowered her head, quietly apologizing. Her body was trembling, her heart pounding loudly with fear. Seiji reached out his hands to her, approaching her gently, and invited her to go back home. She asked him to repeat himself. Her face was puzzled. He asked her not to look at him like that, and explained that she had nowhere else to go. Hayashi wondered if she should go home. Go back there? She remembered all the times he had beaten her. Home. A moment flashed in her mind where Seiji swung at her. No, she was scared, but she had nowhere else to go. She had nothing, no choice, nothing she could do about it, and she felt pathetic. She remembered Yamamoto, who had taken her in, and appreciated her just the way she was. He also praised her. Hayashi had tears in her eyes again. She realized that she wanted to go back. She wanted to go to Yamamoto. She hugged herself and thought that maybe Yamamoto wouldn't help her anymore, that he wouldn't come for her, that she had pushed him away herself. I wonder what he would say if he saw this picture. She was sure he would ask her what she wanted. She realized what she wanted. She laughed nervously. Seiji asked what was wrong. She called him, and when he responded, she said firmly and decisively that she was not going to return to him. She looked at him angrily. Seiji was surprised by her words. Hayashi was still shaking with fear and said she wasn't going to go to the police, so he should just get out of her sight. The guy didn't understand why. She clutched the fabric of her shorts and continued to speak. Why was he asking? Didn't he understand how much pain and suffering he had caused her? She screamed, "What's not clear here?" Seiji calmly said that if he had hurt her, he was sorry. Hayashi asked what he was apologizing for. The guy calmly said that he was sorry for hitting her and asked her to understand that he sometimes loses his temper easily. She countered him, asking if daily beatings were sometimes for him. He asked her if she understood that she was also to blame for this. Hayashi was surprised by his statement. He continued, saying that she never listened to him, which of course annoyed him. He pointed out that she was to blame. Hayashi shouted that all she did was try to please him. He wanted her to be a housewife, so she dropped out of college. Wasn't that enough for him? Seiji asked her to listen and pointed out that he had been supporting her. Despite Hayashi's indignation, he continued his monologue, laughing that, frankly, she was a terrible cook. He had to endure it every night, and he would be better off eating semi-prepared meals. He asked again if she was going to come back. It was easy for him to find a replacement for her, but who would want her? He continued to tell her that she had nothing, no money, no home, no education, and on top of that, she was rude and hysterical. But he was implying that only he could put up with her like this. Did she understand that? Hayashi clenched her fists. She didn't understand why she had been betrayed by such a person. As always, he didn't care about her. Seiji grabbed her arm and started pulling her, saying they were going home. He squeezed her arm painfully, and when Hayashi realized this, her heart started pounding again, and she started screaming no. She screamed for him to let her go. He screamed for her to stop hysterics. Hayashi continued to struggle, and he yelled at her to stop. As she struggled, she mentally asked Yamamoto to help her. Someone else yelled for him to stop. grabbing Seiji's arm. He stood between him and Hayashi. It was Yamamoto. Catching his breath, Yamamoto reached out his hand, pushing Seiji away, firmly saying that he thought she didn't want to go with Seiji. Hayashi had tears in her eyes. Yamamoto stood between Hayashi and her ex-boyfriend. He looked surprised. The girl looked at the breathless Yamamoto. Hayashi thought that he had followed her after all. Seiji shouted, "Where the hell is Yamamoto going?" He explained that Seiji was dragging her down the street by force, and he thought Yamamoto would just stand there and watch. The ex-boyfriend tried to parry, apologizing and trying to explain the misunderstanding, saying that she was his girlfriend. Yamamoto asked again. He also asked why Hayashi was resisting so much. Seiji explained that she was a bit hysterical, so he was actually a little embarrassed about the scene. Hayashi tensed up. Yamamoto replied that Seiji wasn't shy about expressing himself. He apologized again, explaining that he thought he was used to it all, but his nerves couldn't take it. Yamamoto asked if it was just a domestic quarrel. Seiji confirmed this. Yamamoto said that it seemed somewhat peculiar. He had heard something about beatings and assaults. What were they discussing? Seiji said irritably that maybe outsiders shouldn't stick their noses into other people's business. Yamamoto retorted that they were the ones who started arguing in the middle of the street. So how could he just walk by? Seiji started yelling, telling him to shut up and explaining that the girl was just having another tantrum, but he loved her and asked him to leave them alone. Yamamoto said he understood. Hayashi wondered if he believed Seiji's words. Had he fallen for his lies? Yamamoto agreed that an outsider shouldn't get involved in such things. Seiji was glad that he finally understood him. Yamamoto sighed, and he confidently stated that they would then go to the police. Seiji was surprised. He hesitated, asking why the police? Yamamoto countered that he himself had said that outsiders should not stick their noses into other people's business. He thought Seiji was right, and that the police would have their own unbiased opinion. Seiji tried to persuade him that it wasn't worth taking things that far. Yamamoto said that loud arguments under the windows were exactly the kind of situation when the police should be called. Hayashi looked behind her and, seeing the people there, wondered when they had all appeared. Seiji tried again to counter that it wasn't really the case. But Yamamoto interrupted him, saying that he was resisting again and asked if he was even trying to solve the problem. If everything was as he said, then why not go to the police? Or was there a reason he couldn't go there? Seiji swallowed nervously. He said that wasn't the case, so Yamamoto asked again. Where did the bruises on her arms come from? The people behind them began to whisper, discussing domestic violence, wondering whether to call the police. Hayashi felt uncomfortable. Seiji shouted, explaining that the girl had simply fallen. Yamamoto retorted, she fell and broke all her arms? And then probably her legs too? She was covered in bruises, both new and almost healed. But Seiji denied again, less confidently, that she had tripped. Yamamoto asked why he hadn't been watching her if she stumbled so often. Seiji shouted, what difference did it make to him? He yelled that they were dating, living together, and loved each other, so they would figure it out themselves. Yamamoto asked again, loved each other? Hayashi was surprised. He had a sullen and angry expression on his face. Yamamoto was furious. He asked firmly where Seiji was when she disappeared. He replied that he was looking for her. Yamamoto asked if he had filed a missing person report, but he hesitated. Yamamoto asked why he hadn't. After all, he was so worried. Seiji said uncertainly that he hadn't had time. He was busy. Yamamoto started yelling, asking again if he was busy. What could be more important than her safety? He didn't even try to support her. He just mocked and ridiculed her. What kind of love is that? Only children behave like that. Try to assert themselves at someone else's expense. Seiji stood in shock. Yamamoto looked sternly at Seiji, who remained silent and couldn't find the words. Hayashi was embarrassed and pleased that Yamamoto was angry on her behalf. Someone like her. Behind them, people continued to whisper. Seiji bowed his head, quietly apologizing. He tried to justify himself, saying that no matter how hard he tried, everything inside him was boiling over. And he apologized again. Seiji stood with his head bowed. Hayashi was silent, certain that he would not change anyway, but she asked him to stop. He wondered what that meant, that she would come back, but the girl firmly said that she would not return to him, that it was enough. Seiji insisted that he couldn't live without her. Hayashi asked him not to make a scene. He said he wasn't lying. He really wasn't lying. She asked him to stop. Seiji kept saying that she was the only one he needed, and asked her to come back. There was a hickey visible on his neck behind his shirt collar. This shocked Hayashi. She grabbed him by his shirt. She pulled back the collar and looked contemptuously at the hickey. Seiji flinched, trying to explain himself. Hayashi quietly confirmed that this was why he hadn't filed a missing person report. He had already found a replacement for her. Seiji tried to say that wasn't true, but he was confused. Yamamoto watched silently. Hayashi noticed that all his emotions were just lies. She understood that. Seiji reached out to her, asking her to wait. Hayashi stood firm and told him to get lost. Early in the morning, Yamamoto woke up disheveled. The bed was empty. He had slept on the futon. The apartment was quiet and empty, while Yamamoto was washing the floors. He wondered if the room had always been this big. He remembered how she used to stand in the kitchen. He was so used to living with her. Yamamoto sat down to watch TV. There was a half-eaten pudding on the table. He wondered when she would return. Watching some program, Yamamoto asked her to come back in his mind. At midnight, the door creaked. Hayashi arrived. Yamamoto turned around, greeted her, and remarked that she had been gone a long time. The girl closed the door and mumbled something, and looked at the floor. Yamamoto asked what was wrong, what had happened. Last night, the police took her away to sort everything out. Her ex ran away as soon as he heard the siren. Yamamoto wanted to walk her to the station, but he was sent home. He doesn't know what happened next. Yamamoto said it didn't matter and invited her into the house. Hayashi asked if he was sure. Yamamoto suggested she take a shower to cool off. Hayashi nodded and left. Yamamoto thought that she probably didn't want to talk about it, so he saw no point in asking questions. He decided to cook her something delicious for now. While she was washing, he cooked. The food was already on the plates when the bathroom door creaked open. Yamamoto said she was just in time. The fried rice was almost ready. But Hayashi called him. Turning to her, he saw that she was standing there embarrassed, wearing only a towel. Yamamoto was also embarrassed, very much so. He asked her if she had forgotten her clothes, and said she was clumsy. But Hayashi approached him and, grabbing the corners of the towel, began to open it. Yamamoto asked her to stop, embarrassed. She threw the towel on the floor. He asked her to put something on while he covered his eyes with his hand and fumbled for the towel on the floor. Hayashi asked if he remembered what she had said. He asked what she was talking about. The girl said that he had saved her, not just saved her, but done something she would never forget for the rest of her life. So, she asked him to enjoy himself. Yamamoto turned away, holding her towel, still covering his eyes. Hayashi continued, saying that he could do whatever he wanted with her body. She would fulfill all his desires. Anything he wanted. Now she had no choice. And she was 100% confident in her body, even though Seiji complained about her cooking. But he never said anything bad about her body. But Yamamoto said no, thank you. He asked rudely, are you completely unintelligent? Hayashi pressed her hands to her chest, surprised by his behavior. He continued to say that she wanted to turn him into trash too. Stalking, beating, humiliating him wasn't enough for her. She wanted more. He approached her, covering her with a towel with both hands. Yamamoto covered his eyes again, saying that if he did that, how would he be any better than her ex? She noticed that he had strange thoughts, but he said that they were not thoughts, but the true state of affairs, and asked her to get dressed. Hayashi asked what he was talking about. Yamamoto just wanted to answer. Hayashi clutched the towel to herself and asked why he was so kind. She burst into tears and crouched down. Yamamoto covered his eyes, thinking she was really crying. Hayashi cried, wiped her eyes, and apologized, clutching the towel to her chest. Yamamoto told her that everything was fine and asked her to get dressed. She nodded. She sneezed as she entered the bathroom. The guy sighed. He looked at the food, which had already cooled down. He decided it needed to be reheated, so he poured everything back into the pan. He heard footsteps behind him. Hayashi called him. He responded. She asked if he was sure he didn't mind her staying. He asked her if that was what she wanted. Hayashi asked what kind of answer that was. She shouted that it was his room, not hers, so why did he care about her wishes? Only he could decide whether she could stay or not. Yamamoto sighed and said that he had already answered. He would always be with her, let her stay, or lend her money if she needed it. It didn't matter to him. He thought she had understood that long ago, and he asked her if she wanted to stay or not. Hayashi trembled and asked what kind of questions these were. He hadn't forgotten that Seiji now knew what he looked like. Did he understand that he could come at any moment? And even so, why was Yamamoto doing all this? Why was he hiding her? She asked why he was going so far for her sake. Yamamoto asked himself the same question, but he said it was simple because he could, as long as it was within his power, he was ready to help with anything. She remained silent. He continued, saying that wasn't the only reason. Yamamoto smiled and said that he also wanted to eat her burger steak again. This embarrassed her. Hayashi asked again if he was doing all this for her burger steak. He said yes. Then she said she had 2 requests. He asked what they were. The girl paused, looking away. Then, gathering her confidence and courage, she said that the first was to let her stay. He said, of course. And her second request. She confidently said that she wanted to file a report with the police, which surprised Yamamoto greatly. She hugged herself and said that, of course, she could do it herself, but she was afraid. She might change her mind at the last minute, but she didn't want to lose anything, so She bowed and asked him to accompany her to the station. Hayashi straightened up, and her eyes were once again filled with confidence that everything was now fine. She took a few steps toward him. Yamamoto realized that Hayashi had finally been able to step out of her shell. He replied, "Okay." Hayashi smiled happily and shyly, keeping her hands behind her back, and thanked him. The late-night store greeted Yamamoto with its usual quiet. The guy was sitting behind the register, lazily propping his cheek with his hand and yawning widely. Leaning back in his chair, he thought about how badly he wanted to sleep. It had been a really tough day. Staring blankly ahead, the student thought that at least one problem had been taken care of. The memory of the evening when he and Hayashi had gone to the police station immediately came to mind. Back then, Hayashi had filed a report after all. By the time the police arrived, her ex-boyfriend had already vanished. Then the apartment where the officers had gone to investigate came to mind. After that, they sent Yamamoto home, and Hayashi led the police to her ex's house. However, there wasn't the slightest trace left that anyone had ever lived there. Thinking about that man, the guy couldn't help but wonder where he could have gone. Lowering his gaze, Yamamoto thought gloomily, how much longer would Hayashi have to live in fear? A moment later, his attention was drawn to the surveillance camera screen. It looked like someone had entered the store. Having already decided it was a customer, the student suddenly opened his eyes wide in surprise. It turned out to be Hayashi. The girl approached the cash register with a slight smile. She calmly remarked that she had finally found him. Yamamoto immediately stood up from his chair and asked in surprise what Hayashi was even doing here so late. Hayashi paused for a moment. Then she calmly replied that they had run out of toothpaste. The guy started scanning the item, still not understanding her logic, and pointed out that she could have just told him about it. Then he would have bought it himself. The girl simply reminded him that she didn't have a phone, after which she asked with a slight reproach, "Have you already forgotten that too?" After scanning the barcode on the package, Yamamoto wearily agreed that he had indeed forgotten. He then added that she really should buy a new phone, if only so she could stay in touch with her friends. Hayashi smiled gently and calmly replied that it wasn't a big deal. She hardly had any friends left anyway. Even as she said this, the girl kept smiling, though a flash of sadness crossed her eyes for a moment. She quietly added that those people weren't particularly reliable anyway. Yamamoto couldn't help but recall everything that had happened to her before. He quietly asked if that was true, though he was probably just thinking out loud. Hayashi, however, pointed out that he himself, by the way, was also pretty hard to get a hold of. The guy didn't argue and calmly agreed. However, almost immediately his face grew serious again. He asked why she had gone out alone so late in the first place, reminding her that they still didn't know where her ex-boyfriend was right now. Hayashi confidently replied that everything was fine. Looking at her, Yamamoto thought she was being too optimistic again. Glancing around at the empty store and the magazine racks, the student noted to himself that there were still no customers. Then again, few people would want to go shopping at this hour. Meanwhile, the girl looked at him intently and asked if he was tired. She offered to keep him company. Yamamoto immediately declined and told her to go home and sleep, adding that it was good for her skin. Even the guy himself realized that sounded like a pretty lame excuse. When he reached for his wallet to pay for the purchase, Hayashi offered to pay herself. Then Yamamoto, with a completely serious expression, declared that he was actually planning to use that toothpaste too. The girl smiled quietly and replied that he simply wasn't leaving her any choice. A strange silence hung between them for a few seconds. The guy looked at her questioningly and asked why she had frozen. Hayashi looked away, feeling a little awkward, and reminded him that she had actually said she would stay and keep him company. Only now did Yamamoto realize that this wasn't a suggestion at all, but a decision she'd already made. With a slight smile, the girl held up her fist and suddenly asked how long he'd been working here. The guy immediately asked what this sudden change of subject was all about. However, Hayashi simply told him to answer. After thinking for a moment, Yamamoto said he'd been working here for about 3 months. Then the girl asked with interest how often he visited his parents. The student frowned wearily and called the question silly, but Hayashi still waited for an answer. In the end, he admitted that he hadn't visited them even once. After that, Hayashi began asking question after question. Was he part of any clubs? Did he have any other part-time jobs? Did he do any volunteer work? Yamamoto answered everything with the same brief refusal. When the conversation turned to hobbies and special skills, the guy calmly replied that his hobby was cleaning. Hayashi immediately called him a real neat freak. Yamamoto narrowed his eyes suspiciously and asked if that was even supposed to be a compliment. The girl laughed awkwardly. For a few seconds, they just looked at each other. Then Hayashi quietly brought up what she had said earlier. She really did regret that they had hardly spoken before. As he listened to her, Yamamoto couldn't help but recall his school days and the cold, contemptuous look she used to cast on those around her. Because of that, He thought that things back then would surely have turned out quite differently. True, he added almost immediately that it was too late to dwell on such things now. Hayashi lowered her gaze slightly and quietly agreed that perhaps that was true. But then the girl calmly added that there are some things people only understand after making mistakes and feeling regret. Lifting her head, she smiled gently and admitted that she wanted to get to know him better. Yamamoto froze in surprise. Looking at her sincere smile, the guy tried to object that he wasn't really an interesting person at all, especially for someone like her. However, he wasn't allowed to finish. Hayashi unexpectedly called his name. Then, placing her hand on her cheek, she remarked with a sweet smile that there was nothing she could do about it. After all, she was the one who started all this. Yamamoto immediately grumbled that she was too smug, but the girl just replied nonchalantly that she didn't see anything wrong with it. Crossing his arms over his chest, the guy finally gave in with a small smile and declared that he would definitely prove to her just how pointless this curiosity would turn out to be. Hayashi, with her hands behind her back, remarked with satisfaction that this was much more like the Yamamoto she was used to. Fiddling with her dark locks, the girl suddenly asked, "Don't you yourself have any interest at all in learning more about her? For example, what was it actually like to live with her?" After a moment's thought, Yamamoto calmly replied that it was quite exhausting. Hayashi immediately perked up and asked again in surprise. Then the guy started listing things. He reminded her that he was actually trying to keep her hidden, but she still calmly left the house on her own. Then he added that she was always arguing, didn't listen to him, and was constantly causing trouble. Hayashi looked at him silently while he continued to grumble. But a moment later, Yamamoto scratched his neck sheepishly and, looking away, quietly admitted that it wasn't all that bad. A gentle smile appeared on the girl's face. She noticed that he was completely hopeless at giving compliments. The guy, however, added more confidently that there was also a strange girl living next door who, for some reason, really wanted to know absolutely everything about him. Hayashi immediately called him hopeless. Then Yamamoto asked with a slight smirk, "Am I really that hopeless?" After all, someone had to help her realize that. After those words, they both laughed quietly. A moment later, Hayashi called his name again and asked what he wanted for dinner. Yamamoto replied without hesitation that he'd be happy with anything as long as she cooked it. The girl immediately muttered discontentedly that he was at it again. As they talked, the guy suddenly realized that he would never have believed such a thing back in high school. If someone had told him back then that he'd be chatting so casually with Hayashi in the middle of the night, he would have just laughed it off. And yet, now Yamamoto suddenly understood one simple thing. Living together with the former arrogant queen of the school turned out to be surprisingly comfortable. Some time had passed. The sun was shining brightly outside the window, and small clouds drifted slowly across the blue sky. Meanwhile, Yamamoto was in the bathroom, diligently scrubbing the faucet with a brush. Looking at the shiny metal, the boy thought once again about how quickly dirt builds up on faucets. As he continued cleaning, he noted to himself with satisfaction just how clean everything had turned out. But the next second, the student jumped in surprise. Hayashi suddenly appeared behind him. The girl stood with her hands on her hips, glaring at him with an extremely displeased look. From her grim expression, Yamamoto immediately realized that things were bad. Hayashi briefly ordered him to come over. The guy obediently stepped out of the bathroom and asked, bewildered, what had happened. In response, the girl held up 3 fingers in front of his face. She reminded him that he had gone to clean the bathroom at 10 in the morning, and now it was already 1 o'clock. Only now did Yamamoto realize that he had indeed spent a full 3 hours in there. Hayashi asked irritably if he even understood why she was angry. The guy calmly replied that he understood because she was yelling. The next second, the girl flared up even more and loudly protested that that wasn't the point at all. She pointed her finger at the table and reminded him that because of him, lunch had gone cold long ago. Yamamoto looked toward the room and indeed saw the untouched food on the small table. Hayashi, continuing to scold him, reminded him that she had already called him to eat. Then the guy replied that he'd be there soon. Scratching his cheek sheepishly, Yamamoto quietly admitted that he seemed to have actually said that. The girl immediately pointed out that an entire hour had passed since he'd said that. Later, when they finally sat down at the table, the guy finally realized that Hayashi had simply been waiting for him all this time. The food remained untouched. Looking at the table, Yamamoto wondered how he would feel if he had been made to wait that long. Almost immediately, he realized he would have been angry too. Now it became clear to him why Hayashi had been so angry. After a while, the girl calmed down a bit and addressed him by name in a more even voice. Yamamoto immediately tensed up. Then Hayashi declared that from now on, he could only do housework for 1 hour a day. The guy looked at her as if he'd just been mortally insulted. Stunned, he asked her to repeat what she'd said. The girl calmly explained that she understood how important cleaning was to him, but his obsession was starting to look abnormal. That was exactly why she'd have to limit him. After that, Hayashi warned him that if he cleaned for more than an hour again tomorrow, she would get very angry. Yamamoto immediately began to protest. Hayashi told him, with a look of displeasure, to stop acting like a child. Then the guy muttered quietly that this was too cruel. Looking at her with an almost pleading gaze, he cautiously asked if he could at least have 2 hours. The girl just smiled and calmly asked how many hours had he been allowed. Gritting his teeth, Yamamoto struggled to force out an answer. 1 hour. Satisfied, Hayashi immediately called him a good boy. After that, the girl clapped her hands joyfully and announced that now they could finally eat properly. They wished each other bon appetit and began to eat. Yamamoto calmly ate rice with chopsticks while Hayashi watched TV next to him and ate her dinner as well. And yet, even in a moment like this, the guy continued to suffer mentally because of the cleaning restriction. 1 hour seemed like a real nightmare to him. But at the same time, Yamamoto suddenly realized that living with Hayashi, strange as it might seem, was actually quite pleasant. Immediately after that thought, he mentally forbade himself from ever saying such a thing out loud. It was too embarrassing. After dinner, the table was already empty and the dirty dishes were left standing nearby. Meanwhile, Hayashi was lying on the bed with a tablet in her hands, watching more videos. Muttering something discontentedly about annoying people, the girl kept scrolling through the videos. Yamamoto glanced at the screen and realized she was watching instant karma videos again. He wondered if she liked these kinds of stories a little too much. At first, he had assumed that Hayashi's interest was linked to her past and her ex-boyfriend, who had hurt her. However, now it seemed to him that she simply enjoyed watching stories where evil got its just deserts. Suddenly, Hayashi burst out laughing at another video. And, at that very moment, the tablet slipped from her hands. The device fell with a dull thud right onto her face. Yamamoto looked at her silently and thought that this was truly instant karma. Hayashi immediately clutched her face and began moaning pitifully in pain. The tablet had hit her right on the nose. Writhing on the bed and covering her face with her hands, the girl tried to ease the pain even a little. Watching this, Yamamoto suddenly caught himself thinking that he had unwittingly found her attractive. Realizing this, the guy turned away sharply and blushed slightly. He immediately tried to banish such thoughts from his mind, mentally repeating that everything was fine. Even though they lived together, this was still too much for him. Getting up from the floor, the guy looked again at Hayashi, who continued to toss and turn in bed, whether from pain or from embarrassment. Looking at her, Yamamoto couldn't help but think that this was exactly what the famous high school queen looked like right now. Probably, many of the guys who had once chased after her would have given a lot to see her like this. Even he himself would have been shocked by such a sight in the past. The guy offered her some ice, but the girl, giving a quiet giggle, said everything was fine. Yamamoto immediately thought that she didn't look at all like everything was really okay. And yet, that was exactly how they continued to create new memories. Looking at her, the guy quietly remarked that she was a real klutz. Hayashi, with a slight smile, asked him to be quiet. After some time, Hayashi decided to buy a new smartphone so she could gradually return to normal life. While shopping with Yamamoto, the girl looked at the phone displays. Looking at one of the models, Hayashi quietly remarked that she'd like a phone just like the one she used to have, but they probably didn't sell that model anymore. Yamamoto calmly replied that if she was talking about a model from high school, then of course not. The girl nodded in agreement. After that, they continued looking for a phone. Hayashi carefully examined the models until she finally pointed to one of the smartphones. Yamamoto immediately reached for his wallet, but the girl stopped him. She said she would pay for it herself. She still had some money left over from her part-time job. The guy didn't argue and calmly agreed. A short while later, they had already left the store. Hayashi was smiling as she held the bag with her new phone and looked genuinely happy. Yamamoto said he was happy for her, and the girl unexpectedly thanked him. The guy remarked in surprise that he hadn't done anything at all, but Hayashi just smiled and replied that he had come with her anyway. For a moment, Yamamoto was even at a loss for words. As they walked down the bustling street, the guy looked around suspiciously and seemed rather strange and stern. Noticing this, Hayashi chuckled and said he was acting like some kind of criminal. Yamamoto calmly replied that they still didn't know where her ex was. The memory of that day immediately came to mind, when a man had accosted Hayashi right in the middle of the street, trying to force her to come back. Back then, Yamamoto had deliberately pretended to be a random passerby, so he could intervene and help her. As they continued walking, the girl thought to herself that everything would probably be fine. Yamamoto immediately asked why she had come to that conclusion. Hayashi calmly replied that if anything happened, she would just start screaming at the top of her lungs. Yamamoto added that he wouldn't mind at all if the police got involved. Later, back at home, they began to figure out the new phone. Hayashi opened the box, read the instructions, and put the smartphone on charge. Looking around, Yamamoto noticed that the system, specifically the OS, was a little different from her old phone, but she'd get used to it quickly. The girl immediately asked, "What's an OS?" The guy explained that it referred to the operating system. Hayashi nodded thoughtfully and buried her nose in the manual again, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar terms. Watching her, Yamamoto immediately realized she hadn't understood a thing. After a while, the girl admitted that she wasn't very tech-savvy. The guy was surprised, since she'd been using the tablet with no trouble at all. However, Hayashi honestly admitted that she had only watched videos on it. Akari had shown her all the buttons once, and she had simply memorized what they looked like. Upon hearing the word buttons, Yamamoto was completely lost. It seemed Hayashi had meant apps. The guy even gloomily reflected on the fact that nowadays, even older people know what apps are. It seemed she was even more hopeless than he'd thought. Meanwhile, the girl asked him to show her how to connect her phone to the internet. Yamamoto asked if she was talking about Wi-Fi. Hayashi immediately asked back, "What's Wi-Fi?" The guy stared at her, as if he'd already started doubting the reality of what was happening. Meanwhile, the girl kept scrolling through the phone's menu and asked how she could find her friend's contacts now. Yamamoto explained that if she remembered her account details, she could just transfer everything via the cloud. Upon hearing the word cloud, Hayashi immediately pictured a real little cloud storing her data, small, with a smile and eyes. The guy let out a heavy sigh and bluntly declared that she really was hopeless. The girl immediately shot him an angry look and warned him that she'd get mad if he kept making fun of her. Yamamoto couldn't help but think that she had very quickly transformed from a helpless girl back into her usual queen. After that, the guy asked when was the last time she had even changed her phone. Hayashi admitted that her best friend Akari used to handle everything back then. Yamamoto asked in amazement, did she really have a personal assistant? After that, he asked about passwords. The girl calmly replied that Akari had those too. Yamamoto even choked on his drink. He understood perfectly well that they were close, but this still seemed like going too far. Then the guy cautiously asked if she remembered at least the password for the account. Hayashi immediately turned away and honestly admitted that she didn't. After a while, Yamamoto finally finished setting up the phone and handed it to the girl. Hayashi happily thanked him and immediately asked what to do about her contacts. The guy admitted that he'd run into some trouble with that. After that, his expression suddenly turned serious. Yamamoto asked Hayashi to tell him something. Sensing the change in his voice, the girl immediately became wary. Then the guy asked how exactly she had met her ex. Hayashi fell silent instantly. She didn't understand why he had suddenly brought this up. Nervously fidgeting with her fingers on her knees, the girl finally admitted that a friend from college had invited her on a group date. That was where she met the man who worked at the bank. Yamamoto listened attentively, sitting in front of her on the floor in the lotus position. After that, he asked if any of her friends or acquaintances were personally connected to that man. Hayashi looked at him in surprise and replied that no, they weren't. Then the guy exhaled with relief and remarked with a small smile that that was good. The girl was still looking at him, confused. At that moment, Yamamoto asked for her phone. Hayashi asked warily what he was going to do. However, the guy had already started typing something quickly on both phones, his and the girl's. He explained that he was entering the numbers of her friends that he could remember. After that, Yamamoto advised her to ask her friends to help her recover the rest of her contacts. Hayashi thanked him, but she still looked noticeably tense. Avoiding his gaze awkwardly, she admitted that it would be hard for her to text people after everything that had happened, especially those she hadn't been very close with before. Then Yamamoto calmly handed her phone back and suggested she start by calling Akari. He was sure she would definitely help. Hayashi asked in surprise, how did he even know that? Lowering her gaze to the phone screen, the girl saw Kasahara, Akari's contact. After that, Hayashi slowly turned her head toward Yamamoto. Her gaze grew suspicious. It seemed her female intuition had already kicked in. Hayashi looked at him intently and asked, how did you get Akari's number? Yamamoto awkwardly looked away, suddenly feeling a strange pressure from her intense gaze. About a day had passed. The day had come when Akari was supposed to visit them. Yamamoto recalled the previous evening. Back then, Hayashi, sitting on the bed with her phone in her hands, had calmly announced that Akari was going to visit them. At the time, the guy hadn't understood at all why her best friend would even come to their house. The next morning, Yamamoto rubbed his eyes sleepily and sighed heavily. It seemed to him that his complicated relationship was only with Hayashi, but things with Akari were far from simple either. He shifted his gaze to the bed. Hayashi was still sleeping peacefully. Getting up, the guy decided to tidy up a bit and started putting things away. But a few seconds later, a sleepy female voice sounded behind him. Hayashi wished him good morning. Yamamoto turned around and saw Hayashi, her hair tousled from sleep. The girl looked very sleepy, but she calmly announced that she would make breakfast. A few minutes later, they were already standing in the kitchen. Yamamoto shifted nervously behind her and muttered uncertainly that maybe he should just leave the house before Akari got up. Hayashi immediately refused. She reminded him that Akari wanted to thank him personally, so he shouldn't even think about running away. The guy tapped his foot nervously on the floor and kept hoping in his mind that the whole thing would somehow be called off. Hayashi asked in bewilderment why he was so worried in the first place. While the girl was putting a frying pan on the stove and cracking eggs, Yamamoto cautiously asked if she was sure that Akari really just wanted to thank him. Hayashi calmly replied that, of course, she was sure. But then, turning to him, she suddenly fell silent and started to say something. However, she stopped herself almost immediately and quickly declared that it didn't matter. Yamamoto didn't understand exactly what she had been about to say, but decided not to continue the conversation. After breakfast, Hayashi changed into her usual clothes. Soon there was a knock at the door. The girl suggested that Yamamoto answer it, but he immediately objected, saying that they were actually friends and Hayashi should do it. The girl agreed and went to the door herself. She opened the door and invited the guest inside. The next second, the girl found herself in Akari's tight embrace. Akari literally rushed at her with a joyful cry and immediately began hugging her friend. Akari desperately confessed that she had been terribly worried about her. Hayashi asked, confused, why she was reacting so strongly. But Akari continued to hug her tightly, calling her Mega. Yamamoto, sitting nearby, just listened silently as Hayashi asked her friend to stop tickling her. Finally, the girls went inside. They took off their shoes. Akari immediately turned to Yamamoto and greeted him. The guy gave a brief nod in response. Then the girl remarked with a smile that greeting him that way was a bit rude. After that, Yamamoto awkwardly greeted her properly. Akari immediately said cheerfully that that was much better. Meanwhile, Hayashi watched their conversation with a somewhat suspicious and slightly displeased look. Soon, the girl brought over some ice juice and set the glasses on the table. Akari remarked that she and Hayashi hadn't seen each other in a long time. Hayashi agreed. Then Akari casually added that she and Yamamoto had seen each other just recently. The guy immediately tensed up and quickly asked her not to spread the word about it. Hayashi calmly took a sip of juice and remarked with suspicious calmness, "So that's how it is." Yamamoto grew nervous inside. He really didn't want Hayashi to find out about his conversation with Akari. But it was too late. Akari casually stated that Yamamoto had been asking her about Hayashi, even though he himself had been pretending not to know anything. The guy explained, looking annoyed, that he just thought Akari might know something about Hayashi's ex-boyfriend. She just calmly replied that she had understood everything right away. Yamamoto couldn't believe she had figured him out so easily. Meanwhile, Hayashi looked at her friend with a slight smile and noticed that she had indeed been looking for her. Akari immediately said, "Of course I was." It looked as if her best friend had simply vanished. Hayashi admitted that if it hadn't been for meeting Yamamoto, things could have ended very badly. Hearing this, Akari immediately thanked the guy sincerely. Yamamoto calmly replied that anyone in his place would have done the same, but the girl confidently objected and thanked him again. After that, she unexpectedly admitted that she never would have thought Hayashi would end up at Yamamoto's house one day. Then Akari turned her gaze to Hayashi and cautiously asked if everything would be okay now. Yamamoto answered for her. He calmly said that Hayashi had no intention of going back to her ex. True, they still hadn't found the man, so it was too early to relax. Akari looked at her friend sympathetically, but Hayashi immediately snapped back, saying that she wasn't some helpless fool. Then Akari reminded her that she had put up with everything for too long and hadn't told anyone about the situation or the beatings. Those words immediately silenced Hayashi. Yamamoto asked Akari not to speak that way anymore, since it was emotionally draining. The girl calmly apologized, but then she added that if no one told Hayashi such things, she wouldn't understand anything on her own. After that, Akari remarked that Hayashi was too kind. The guy couldn't help but think that he used to hear that about her all the time. After a while, Hayashi admitted that, to be honest, she didn't think her ex would come back. Akari asked in surprise, why? Hayashi calmly explained that he was too dependent on the opinions of those around him. Now that the police had started looking for him, he was unlikely to want to show his true self to people. Akari mused that then Hayashi would finally be able to walk the streets in peace. However, Yamamoto still thought it was too early for that. He himself didn't know how much longer Hayashi would have to hide. So the guy said he didn't mind her going for walks, but someone always had to be with her. Hayashi calmly agreed. Akari, for her part, noted happily that this was good news. But the next second, the room was interrupted by the loud sound of the girl's rumbling stomach. Everyone immediately looked at Hayashi. She instantly felt embarrassed and blushed. Akari immediately started teasing her friend, asking if it was time for a snack. Hayashi hastily declared that she would prepare something right away. But Akari suddenly asked if she even knew how to cook. Yamamoto immediately replied calmly that Hayashi was a very good cook. Walking over to the fridge, the girl looked inside and sadly announced that there was almost no food left. Then Akari suggested they go grocery shopping. Hayashi agreed right away. Yamamoto also got up and said he would go with them. After saying this, the guy noticed that Hayashi, for some reason, looked at him with a slightly downcast gaze. He asked in surprise, "What's wrong?" But the girl quickly looked away and quietly replied that nothing was wrong. Yamamoto still thought she was acting a little strange, and after a while, they finally set off to go shopping. As they continued walking down the street, Akari put her finger to her chin and looked curiously at Hayashi's face. Then she asked what dish Hayashi made best. Hayashi thought for a moment and replied that it was probably her grandmother's stew. Akari immediately perked up and, with a smile, mentioned her favorite dish. She began talking about tsukadani, and, moving a little closer to Hayashi, Akari declared with a satisfied smile that she would definitely make it for her next time. Hayashi calmly agreed. Meanwhile, Yamamoto trailed behind the girls, feeling completely out of place. Watching their lively conversation, the guy thought he didn't understand girls' talk at all. He also couldn't help but note to himself that tsukadani was actually a pretty old-fashioned dish. As the conversation continued, Hayashi suddenly mentioned that Yamamoto liked steaks. Akari immediately laughed and said that sounded childish. Then the guy reminded them grumpily that he was actually still walking right there and could hear them perfectly well. Hayashi turned to him for a moment. Then she leaned back toward Akari and quietly remarked that her face had turned red. The girl immediately waved her hand dismissively and quickly insisted that nothing was wrong. Hayashi asked anxiously if she had a fever. Should they go home? But Akari firmly refused. Then Yamamoto calmly remarked that perhaps Akari was just too happy to see everyone. After all, they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Akari immediately began to vehemently deny it, holding her hands out in front of her. She insisted that wasn't the case at all. Hayashi asked again, "Are you sure that's true?" Then Akari suddenly turned to her and, feigning offense, asked, "Who do you believe more anyway, me or some guy named Yamamoto?" Hayashi replied almost immediately that, of course, she believed her. Yamamoto just looked silently at the girls, completely clueless as to what had just happened. In the end, he just waved his hand and said that the main thing was that they were having fun. Hearing this, Akari unexpectedly smiled sweetly and declared that he was so kind she might even fall in love with him. The guy instantly turned away, muttering sheepishly that it was a completely silly joke. Hayashi suddenly asked if they talked often at all. Akari calmly replied that they didn't. They had only really started talking very recently. After that, the girl turned to Yamamoto, as if asking for confirmation. The guy briefly agreed. However, after that, Hayashi fell silent for some reason. She looked away and thoughtfully continued walking beside her friend, as if lost in her own thoughts. Yamamoto couldn't help but note to himself that he was surprised. He was even glad that Hayashi hadn't started asking unnecessary questions, but this behavior still seemed unusual to him. After a while, they finally reached the store. Yamamoto was pushing the cart behind the girls when Akari suddenly suggested throwing a takoyaki party. The guy immediately pointed out that they didn't even have a special grill for cooking at their place. Then the girl casually suggested going to her place, since it wasn't far at all. Yamamoto immediately tensed up and declared that it was somehow inappropriate to invite a guy to her place. Akari asked in surprise if he really thought so. The guy confidently confirmed it. Then the girl just laughed and said he was overthinking things. After that, Yamamoto suddenly asked if she ever invited guys over to her place at all. In that very moment, the guy realized how rude his question sounded. He was about to apologize. But Akari first asked in surprise what on earth he was talking about, as if deliberately not understanding his hint. And then the girl smiled slyly. She turned her back to him and, looking over her shoulder, calmly replied that she only invites her girlfriends over. Yamamoto breathed a sigh of relief. He immediately thought to himself that she was just teasing him again. After a while, he and Akari stopped together in front of the refrigerators and began looking at the food. Yamamoto suggested they finish their shopping quickly. Akari happily agreed and reminded him again about the takoyaki party. The guy just replied wearily that he didn't care. Meanwhile, Hayashi watched them silently. The girl stood a little to the side, not joining the conversation. Akari then suggested getting some sausages. Yamamoto calmly agreed, noting that those could be fried too. Hayashi continued to watch them. No tantrums. No unnecessary words. She just quietly noted to herself that she had been right after all. Yamamoto really was a terrible actor, although that wasn't even the point. The interaction between him and Akari seemed too natural, too friendly. Hayashi watched as the guy occasionally smiled at her friend, as he calmly kept the conversation going, as if they'd known each other for a very long time. And the longer she watched them, the more she felt that something wasn't right. Strange details began to surface in her mind, one after another. Akari's number in his phone. He kept saying that college was just a place for him to study. He was always making excuses, claiming he hardly had any friends. But now it turned out that Yamamoto knew Akari's contact information perfectly well and was getting along with her just fine. Watching their backs, Hayashi felt a growing sense of unease. Meanwhile, Akari took out her phone and showed Yamamoto the screen. The guy leaned in closer, looking at the images with her. The girl smiled as she showed him a selection of popular fillings for takoyaki and noted that sausages were very popular right now. Yamamoto muttered thoughtfully that's what's in style now. Akari immediately laughed and asked if he was really willing to believe everything he saw on the internet. The guy let out a heavy sigh and admitted that he was too weak to resist such convincing evidence. The girl laughed again, still unsure whether he was serious or not. A moment later, Yamamoto turned to Hayashi and said he'd go get the cake mix and eggs, and that they could pick out the filling in the meantime. After that, the guy went to another section. The girls were left alone. Akari remarked with a slight smile that Yamamoto hadn't changed a bit. Hayashi asked, puzzled, what exactly she meant. Then Akari calmly explained that he was just the same as he had been back in high school. After hearing this, Hayashi found herself lost in memories. Her school days came flooding back. Akari's light hair, a young Yamamoto, and her own cold stares, full of irritation and hostility. She remembered how she had kept her distance from Yamamoto all that time. Meanwhile, Akari, on the contrary, had gradually grown closer to him. Scenes immediately came to mind where Akari and Yamamoto were chatting calmly and smiling at each other. And it was at that very moment that something inside Hayashi seemed to stir. The world seemed to slowly darken before her eyes. The girl felt an unpleasant heaviness in her chest. She immediately realized that such emotions were wrong. Akari was her best friend, and Yamamoto had done so much for her. She couldn't possibly feel this way about them. While a whirlwind of emotions raged inside her, on the outside, Hayashi looked only slightly pensive, but her breathing gradually grew heavier. Her palms began to sweat slightly. Meanwhile, Akari calmly continued picking out groceries, completely oblivious to everything. And Hayashi suddenly remembered that back in high school, it was precisely because of the school festival that she and Yamamoto had never been able to get along properly. And she was secretly watching Seikatsu. Back then, they weren't even dating yet, but she was already truly in love with him. The memory of her classmate immediately came to mind, a sweet, fair-haired girl with dark eyes, wearing the same school uniform. With a smile, she had nudged her forward and told her she should just confess to him. Hayashi had awkwardly looked away then and couldn't make up her mind. Her friend kept encouraging her, assuring her that everything would definitely work out. And if she didn't take the risk, someone else would snatch Seikatsu away. And that was indeed true. Seikatsu was very popular. Hayashi had seen other girls confess to him far too often. She remembered how she once caught him behind the school when a dark-haired student handed him a love letter. At that moment, everything inside her seemed to be engulfed in a thick black fog. Back then, she could think of only one thing. She didn't want to lose. That was when she got the idea to confess to him during the cultural festival. She decided she would do it by the big bonfire at the end of the festival. In that kind of atmosphere, her chances would definitely improve. And if he turned her down, she could always blame it on the festival mood. It was all about to begin very soon. Hayashi stood in the bathroom in front of the mirror, touching up her makeup and trying to steady her trembling hands. But suddenly, an announcement from the festival committee came over the school radio. There would be no bonfire this year. She froze in place, unable to believe what she'd heard. In an instant, her chance had simply vanished. It all happened so unexpectedly that anger welled up inside her immediately. Her hands were shaking harder and harder. She couldn't understand why the committee had decided to cancel the bonfire at all. And then she remembered that Yamamoto was her class's representative on the committee. The next day, Hayashi went straight up to him in class. The boy was sitting quietly at his desk and asked, without much emotion, what she wanted. Then the girl couldn't take it anymore and demanded, right in front of everyone, that he explain why the bonfire had been canceled. Yamamoto replied, quite calmly, that there had been a mistake with the amount of firewood. Hearing this, Hayashi flew into an even greater rage. She began to protest loudly, asking how such a ridiculous mistake could have been made in the first place. Her classmates immediately started turning to look at them. Yamamoto slowly rose from his seat and calmly bowed to her, offering an apology. But what angered her most at that moment wasn't even that. There seemed to be no remorse on his face at all. Gritting her teeth, she declared that an apology alone wasn't enough. The guy calmly agreed with her and apologized again. But inside, Hayashi was literally boiling with rage at that moment. She didn't need his apology. She needed that very chance to confess to Seikatsu. It was then that she first thought she hated Yamamoto with all her heart and considered him a completely useless person. Returning to the present, Hayashi gazed thoughtfully at the grocery bags in her hands. And, To her own surprise, she thought that maybe she should apologize for those times. After all, Yamamoto wasn't the only one responsible for the festival, and if she had been in his shoes, she probably wouldn't have been able to apologize to everyone so calmly. Most likely, she would have started getting angry and making excuses herself. Pursing her lips, the girl thought that Yamamoto had saved her too many times already, and she really wanted to repay him in some way. Looking up at Akari, who was carefully examining the packages of sausages and wondering aloud which ones to choose, Hayashi suddenly caught herself thinking something new. Akari probably likes Yamamoto. This realization made her feel heavy inside again. She called her friend by name, distracting her from reading the ingredients. At that moment, she watched her reaction closely. Maintaining her usual smile, Hayashi asked, as if by chance, what Akari thought of Yamamoto. Her friend was visibly surprised. A hint of embarrassment even flashed across her face. Hayashi immediately began to scrutinize her closely, as if trying to catch her true emotions. Then she asked if something was wrong, but Akari quickly shook her head and hurriedly looked away. And yet, deep down, Hayashi had already reached a conclusion. If everything were really fine, Akari wouldn't have reacted that way. Hayashi had never seen her friend so flustered before. A second later, Akari had already regained her usual calm expression and remarked with a smile that Yamamoto could be terribly annoying at times. Hayashi calmly agreed, but turning her head away, she added unexpectedly quietly that she didn't really want to hear such things said about him. Having said that, the girl felt slightly flustered herself. It seemed to her that she had said too much. Akari immediately rushed to apologize. Hayashi quickly replied that everything was fine, although she herself looked embarrassed and avoided looking her friend in the eye. A strange awkwardness hung between them. It was at that very moment that Hayashi felt someone gently touch her hand. A familiar female voice spoke up. Turning around, the girl saw a blonde girl with bangs. The stranger smiled cheerfully and immediately introduced herself as Mayachi. Hayashi was taken aback at first, but then she remembered her. They had indeed studied in the same program at one time. Akari asked with interest if she was a friend from college. Hayashi immediately perked up and remarked in surprise at how much Mayachi had changed. Mayachi just laughed and replied that quite some time had passed. Then she suddenly asked how things were going with Hayashi's boyfriend. Hayashi smiled awkwardly, and she admitted that they had broken up. Mayachi immediately asked in surprise why. But Hayashi replied, rather sharply, that it was a private matter. Akari watched the conversation in silence. Hayashi herself realized almost immediately that she had been too harsh, even though she hadn't meant to be. However, Mayachi just smiled sadly and said she was sorry to hear that. She said that if they had spent more time together, they surely could have become good friends. Hayashi asked in surprise if she really thought so. Mayachi nodded, and she admitted that she still regretted not trying to stop her when she decided to drop out of college. Hayashi silently thought that even if Mayachi had tried, she would have left anyway. After all, they'd only crossed paths a couple of times, and they'd actually met at that very group date where she'd met her ex. And yet Hayashi couldn't help but admit that Mayachi was truly very kind. Suddenly, Mayachi started apologizing to her. Hayashi's eyes widened in surprise. But then she smiled gently and asked her not to worry. She said she was happy now, so everything was fine. Mayachi seemed as if she wanted to say something. However, Hayashi spoke first. She admitted that people are prone to making mistakes. At home, at work, at university. People make mistakes all the time. And as she said this, the image of Yamamoto involuntarily flashed before her eyes. For some reason, it was he who had prompted her to say these words. Hayashi calmly continued, saying that even serious mistakes don't mean the end of life. You can always start over. After saying this, she held out her hand to Mayachi, as if truly offering to start over. The girl looked at her in surprise. And then, after a moment, she cautiously took her hand. Mayachi quietly admitted that Hayashi had changed a lot. Hayashi asked in surprise if it was really that noticeable. With a smile, she replied that she looked much happier now. Those words unexpectedly struck a chord with Hayashi. She looked away and fell deep in thought. Soon, Mayachi suggested they exchange contact information. She added that she lived nearby and would definitely stop by to see her sometime. Hayashi agreed. While the girls were exchanging numbers, Hayashi thought to herself that this place definitely wasn't near the campus. It must be pretty hard to get here. After that, they said goodbye. Hayashi watched Mayachi walk away and hoped that their conversation would truly make things easier for her. However, the girl left looking a bit too pensive, and the smile gradually faded from her face. Watching her go, Hayashi thought that she didn't want to regret anything anymore, and she didn't want anyone to feel sorry for her. Not Mayachi, not Akari, not Yamamoto either. And just then, Yamamoto returned, apologizing for keeping them waiting so long. Hayashi looked at him, silently for a few seconds and suddenly caught herself thinking that she had done everything right, although she didn't fully understand why. Meanwhile, Yamamoto noticed with surprise that the girls hadn't picked out almost anything. Hayashi immediately started making excuses, explaining that they had run into an old acquaintance by chance. The guy asked briefly if she was a friend. She nodded. Yamamoto simply replied calmly that he understood. But then Akari suddenly noticed Yamamoto's overflowing shopping cart and asked in surprise why he had picked up so many items. The guy smiled slightly and admitted that he'd just gotten distracted and hadn't even noticed how full the basket had gotten. Akari laughed and remarked that they wouldn't be able to eat that much anyway. After all, they were very delicate girls and couldn't eat that much. Yamamoto asked skeptically about the delicate girls. At that very moment, both girls looked at him as if he had just doubted the obvious. The guy immediately hastened to say that he hadn't meant anything by it. Soon they reached the checkout counters. The line turned out to be huge, and there was a lot of noise and commotion all around. Akari apologized and stepped away for a moment, while Hayashi decided to double-check their purchases. In the end, she and Yamamoto were left alone. The girl put her hands behind her back and quietly called his name. The guy didn't even look at her, just mumbled a question in response. Then Hayashi suddenly asked if he liked Akari. Yamamoto fell silent abruptly. He stared ahead in surprise, clearly not expecting such a question. At that moment, Hayashi felt a strange sensation inside. It was as if she already knew what the answer would be. She called his name again, and with a smile, she declared that she would definitely help them in any way she could. But the guy didn't say a word. Just then, the line finally started moving. Hayashi calmly noticed that the register was now open and picked up the basket of groceries. After they paid, the cashier thanked them for their purchase. As they were leaving the store, Yamamoto suddenly called out to Hayashi and quietly asked her not to think about that conversation with Akari. The girl immediately lowered her head and apologized, but a second later, she gave a sly smile, stuck out her tongue, and declared that she would continue with her plan anyway. Later, as they were heading to Akari's house, Yamamoto, as usual, walked a little behind the girls. Looking at them with a cold gaze, he thought that all of this might go too far, especially considering Hayashi's personality. He was almost certain she already had some kind of plan for this party. At one point, the guy caught Hayashi's attention and quietly asked her not to do anything strange. The girl immediately gave him a thumbs up, and with a sly smile, she whispered that he should just leave everything to her. After those words, Yamamoto finally realized that she definitely had something up her sleeve, but he had absolutely no idea what it was. After a while, they arrived at a large apartment complex. Akari happily announced that they had arrived. Yamamoto looked around and admitted that the place was indeed very nice. The girl explained that her parents had specifically looked for an apartment with an automatic lock for safety reasons. As they went inside, Yamamoto asked how old the building was. Akari honestly admitted that she didn't know. Then Hayashi calmly remarked that such things were actually important, since the building's age affected rent, safety, and even earthquake resistance. Yamamoto couldn't help but think that Hayashi wasn't as carefree as she sometimes seemed. Meanwhile, Akari took her friend's hand with a smile and exclaimed admiringly that she knew so much. Hayashi looked away awkwardly and admitted that her parents had never helped her look for a place to live, so she'd had to learn everything on her own. Yamamoto silently acknowledged that there was indeed logic to that. After reaching the right floor, they finally entered the apartment. Akari invited them inside. The apartment turned out to be cozy and very girly. As Yamamoto looked around, he instinctively began to assess the apartment. A one-bedroom unit, a separate kitchen, an automatic lock. Judging by the looks of it, the building was less than 10 years old. He had already started mentally calculating the rent. But at that moment, his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by Hayashi, who calmly named the almost exact price, 390,000 yen a month. Akari stared at her in surprise and asked how she had even figured that out. Meanwhile, Yamamoto walked a little further into the apartment and noted to himself once again that an automatic lock was indeed a good thing for a girl living alone. At that moment, Hayashi suddenly appeared beside him and gave him a light nudge in the side with her elbow. With a sly smile, she quietly remarked that Akari's family was clearly very wealthy. Yamamoto immediately understood what she was getting at. He thought to himself that this was probably her plan all along. First, praise the apartment, then her friend's wealthy family. After that, the guy couldn't help but think that Akari's best friend could surely find someone better than him. But then Akari unexpectedly reminded him of what she had said earlier. She asked if he remembered that no guys had ever come here before. Yamamoto cautiously replied that he did. Then the girl looked up at him with an innocent expression and quietly declared that this was her first time, which she had given to Yamamoto. Realizing the double meaning of her words, the guy instantly turned away and muttered sheepishly that she was talking nonsense again. But inside, a completely different thought had already flashed through his mind. He's too simple, and he gets embarrassed too easily. And Yamamoto had absolutely no idea why Akari was always saying things like that. Once inside Akari's apartment, Hayashi headed for the kitchen, calmly saying that she would use her kitchen for now. Akari immediately followed, saying she would help her. Hearing this, Hayashi turned to her friend in surprise, clearly not expecting such an offer, and then asked if she really intended to help. Akari just smiled slyly, flirtatiously declaring that she didn't actually want to help, but to flirt. Hearing this, Hayashi wearily remarked that her friend would just be in the way, but Akari immediately replied nonchalantly that no one was going to stop her anyway. Watching their conversation from the sidelines, Yamamoto felt awkward, thinking that now, it turned out, even flirting didn't bother anyone. Deciding to get involved in some way, the guy offered to help. However, Akari immediately turned to him with a smile, telling him not to get in the way and to be a good boy. Although she said this with a sweet smile, for some reason, a chill ran down Yamamoto's spine, and clearly not because of the girl's good intentions. Realizing that interfering was pointless, he offered to at least fetch the takoyaki grill. Akari immediately pointed him to one of the cabinets. Walking over to it and opening the door without a second thought, the guy suddenly froze when he saw a veritable mountain of women's clothing right in front of him. He was immediately embarrassed. He slammed the cabinet shut, clearly not expecting to stumble upon such personal items. His cheeks flushed slightly, and he felt guilty, as if he had truly invaded someone else's space, even though there was nothing special there. A faint scent of perfume involuntarily hit his nose, and the guy, awkwardly looking away, mentally agreed that Akari really did smell nice. Watching the girls wash the groceries in the kitchen, he suddenly remembered that back in high school, Kasahara had smelled like fabric softener. Realizing how strange such thoughts sounded, Yamamoto immediately mentally called himself a pervert and tried to push it out of his head. Just then, Akari's voice came from the kitchen, asking loudly if he had found the grill. Startled, the guy hurriedly replied that yes, he had already found it. Soon he pulled out the box, set the grill on a low table, plugged it in, and began to heat up the surface. Sitting down beside her, he gazed thoughtfully at the appliance as it gradually heated up, noting to himself that, for some reason, time seemed to pass more quickly in this apartment than usual. After a while, Akari approached the table with a tray and plates, apologizing for keeping them waiting. Yamamoto awkwardly apologized in return for hardly helping at all, but the girl simply replied calmly that it was fine, and then unexpectedly thanked him for letting her and Hayashi be alone together. After saying this, she turned to her friend, asking, "Isn't that right, Megu?" Hayashi seemed lost in her own thoughts at that moment and didn't react right away. Soon all three of them sat down at a table, after which Akari told Hayashi again that she should thank Yamamoto too. The girl asked in surprise, "Do I really have to do that?" The guy himself immediately replied that there was absolutely no need to thank him. However, Hayashi's mind immediately flashed back to her friend's recent words about who she trusted more. Catching Akari's serious gaze, the girl paused for a moment, then bowed her head slightly, and quietly thanked Yamamoto. Hearing this, the guy asked coldly, "Do I really need to play along with this atmosphere right now?" Akari immediately put on a satisfied smile again, declaring that it was time to start dinner. Soon they were frying takoyaki, and the atmosphere gradually became more lively and relaxed. After a while, Hayashi cried out in indignation, noticing that Akari had eaten her cheese. Without the slightest shame, Akari replied that it was just too delicious. Yamamoto himself was quietly chewing his portion at that moment, feeling quite comfortable. After thinking for a moment, he noted that the cucumbers weren't bad either. Just then, Akari suddenly suggested that Hayashi and she feed each other. Hearing this, the girl immediately asked, looking embarrassed, if that wasn't going too far. Akari looked at her in bewilderment, after which Hayashi awkwardly pointed out that Yamamoto was actually sitting right there, and they might feel too embarrassed. The guy himself was just calmly chewing at that moment, watching what was happening with the most detached expression on his face. Akari paused to think for a moment, as did Hayashi herself. However, as soon as Hayashi turned her gaze to Yamamoto, he already sensed something bad coming. The thought immediately flashed through his mind. Surely the girl wasn't planning to do something strange? And indeed, literally a second later, Hayashi suddenly perked up, smiling brightly and suggesting they play a game with penalties. Akari asked curiously, "What kind of game is that?" Hayashi then began to explain that they would play rock, paper, scissors, and the loser would have to feed the winner. Upon hearing the rules, Yamamoto declared in a completely lifeless voice that he'd rather just die. The girl stared at him in surprise, and Hayashi immediately asked what kind of reaction that was. The guy honestly admitted that he already wanted to leave the room. Hayashi immediately started trying to convince him that he'd have to feed her or Akari by hand, which meant it was practically like winning the lottery for him. However, Yamamoto calmly replied that it all depends on the person, and personally, he doesn't like that sort of thing at all. Then Hayashi abruptly declared that enough was enough. Since he'd said it, they were definitely going to play. With that, the girl abruptly stood up from the table. Watching the scene unfold, Yamamoto could only nod in resignation. Hayashi immediately let out a cheerful exclamation, while Akari, observing the situation, calmly remarked that since Yamamoto didn't object, they could get started. However, Hayashi cut her off immediately and quickly ordered them to start the game. All three held out their hands at the same time. Yamamoto got rock, and the girls got scissors. Hayashi immediately shouted joyfully that Yamamoto would be the one to be fed today. The guy himself stared silently at his fist for a few seconds, then shifted his gaze to the girls and asked incredulously if they were serious. Hayashi immediately pointed at him triumphantly, declaring that in a game with punishments, you can't back out. At that moment, Yamamoto noted to himself that for some reason, he was the only one who felt like a loser, even though he had literally won this round. After that, Hayashi proposed a second round against Akari. The girls played again, and this time Hayashi got scissors, while Kasahara got rock. Akari immediately declared with satisfaction that Hayashi had lost. Hayashi immediately began to look at her own hand with scissors in displeasure, as if she genuinely hadn't expected such an outcome. Watching her, Yamamoto thought that the girl seemed to have never even considered the possibility of her own defeat. Hayashi awkwardly asked again if she really had to feed him now. It was all too obvious from her reaction that she had been counting on passing the whole thing off to Akari. Kasahara simply smiled and reminded her that it had been Hayashi's idea to begin with. Hayashi immediately muttered that she hadn't imagined it that way at all. Akari asked with a smirk, "And exactly how did you picture it?" The girl immediately started stammering, trying to come up with an answer, but she didn't say anything. In the end, as if she'd made up her mind, Hayashi abruptly grabbed the chopsticks, picked up a takoyaki, and held it out to Yamamoto. The guy immediately remarked calmly that if she didn't want to do it, she could just refuse. However, the girl unexpectedly replied with a firm refusal. Surprised, Yamamoto asked why. Hayashi immediately reminded him that it was a punishment in the game. Meanwhile, Akari, propping her chin on her hands, watched the scene unfold with great interest. Yamamoto himself could only think resignedly that clearly no one was going to stop now. Soon, Hayashi carefully brought the takoyaki toward his face with a trembling hand, while holding it from below with her other hand so the sauce wouldn't drip. In a slightly embarrassed voice, she asked him to open his mouth. Yamamoto obediently opened his mouth, and the girl, still visibly nervous, slowly leaned forward. At that moment, Akari remarked with a smile that this was considered an indirect kiss. Those words only made Hayashi feel even more embarrassed. Yamamoto himself awkwardly thought that he actually understood this himself, but was just pretending everything was normal on purpose to make the girls feel uncomfortable. Hayashi froze for a second, and the guy, looking at her, wondered if her arm had gone numb. The girl immediately demanded in a serious voice that he finally open his mouth properly. Hearing this, Yamamoto suddenly thought that with this behavior, she seemed to be deliberately showing that she didn't care at all about such things. Soon, the takoyaki was in his mouth after all, and the guy began to chew calmly. Hayashi immediately asked, "How does it taste?" Yamamoto replied, puzzled, that it was a silly question. After all, it tasted like octopus. Hearing this, the girl immediately objected, saying there was no octopus in the filling at all. After thinking for a moment, the guy realized he hadn't been talking about the ingredients at all. However, instead of explaining, he suddenly noticed that Hayashi's face had turned bright red. Realizing this herself, the girl immediately declared that the games were over. So their game ended literally after the first punishment. A few days later, Yamamoto was sitting at the cash register of the 24-hour store as usual, calmly working his shift. Soon, a familiar voice came from the side, greeting him and wishing him a good shift. Turning around, the guy saw the manager. The man, with a weary smile, remarked that today had been a tough shift. Yamamoto calmly agreed, adding that he would try to keep working normally. At the same time, he noted to himself that the manager was still just as slow as ever. The manager then unexpectedly complained that he wasn't having much luck himself right now. Headquarters had reported that sales at the branches were too low, which made the man visibly slump. Hearing this, Yamamoto finally realized where he had been all this time. After a brief pause, the manager unexpectedly suggested that he leave early. The young man raised his eyebrows in surprise, since there were still about 30 minutes left until the end of his shift. However, the manager just waved his hand, saying there were no customers anyway, and he wasn't going to cut his pay. After that, he quietly admitted that he just wanted to be alone for a bit. Understanding his mood, Yamamoto calmly agreed, thanked his boss, and headed home. Walking down the evening street, the young man pondered how to spend the unexpectedly free time he now had. He even wondered if he shouldn't study a little. After all, exams were just around the corner. He approached his apartment, and upon opening the door, Yamamoto announced as usual that he was home. However, he almost immediately noticed a strange silence. Not seeing Hayashi, he immediately felt uneasy. The face of her ex-boyfriend immediately popped into his head, and for a second, he really thought that he might have found them. But a moment later, the bathroom door opened, and Hayashi came out, complaining about the heat after a shower. Hot water was still running down her body, and she was wearing only her underwear, completely exposed, just drying her wet hair with a towel. For a few seconds, they just stared at each other in silence. After that, Yamamoto immediately turned away and began apologizing hastily. Hayashi immediately hid back behind the bathroom door, asking at the same time why he had come back early in the first place. Then she asked suspiciously if he had come back early on purpose to spy on her after a shower. Hearing this, the guy immediately got upset, claiming that she was talking complete nonsense and that he had actually turned away before he could see anything. However, the girl immediately shouted after him that there were too many questionable videos stored on his tablet. Hearing this, Yamamoto instantly remembered the forgotten tabs and awkwardly asked her to forget about it. He cursed himself inwardly, since Hayashi had already offered to sleep with him twice before in moments of utter despair after problems with her ex. Thinking about this, the guy found himself increasingly unable to understand why he was the one feeling guilty right now, even though he'd seen her by accident. Still, he tried once more to explain that he hadn't meant to spy on her, and had simply come home unexpectedly early. From behind the bathroom door, Hayashi asked why. Upon hearing about the manager who had let him leave early, the girl fell silent for a moment, and then she suddenly asked if everything was okay at his part-time job. The guy honestly admitted that he wasn't sure himself if everything was really okay there. Soon they turned on the air conditioner. Hayashi had already changed into a t-shirt and shorts. Despite this, she was still complaining about the heat after her bath. Turning toward the table, she noticed that her phone wouldn't stop vibrating and wondered who on earth could be calling so persistently. Yamamoto, looking at her, asked in surprise, "Where did you get so many friends?" Hearing this, the girl asked back in bewilderment, "Isn't that normal?" The guy calmly admitted that he himself had almost no friends. Hayashi looked at him in surprise. However, he quickly changed the subject, noting that she didn't even know how to dry her hair properly. After taking a sip of his drink, he explained that if she didn't dry her hair completely, water would drip onto the floor. And sure enough, a few drops had already gathered near the girl. At that moment, an idea seemed to pop into Hayashi's head. Quickly getting up, she headed to the bathroom. Then she returned with a hairdryer and unexpectedly thrust it into Yamamoto's hands, asking him to dry her hair. The guy immediately protested, asking why on earth he should have to do that. However, the girl just smiled innocently. Yamamoto firmly refused, but Hayashi just as confidently declared that this was compensation for him having seen her nearly naked. Hearing this, the guy immediately protested, reminding her that his reflexes were quick enough, and he had turned away before he had a chance to see anything. After these words, the girl suddenly slumped, and she began to demonstratively turn away, muttering quietly that since he hadn't seen anything, there was nothing to be done. Realizing that this could drag on for a long time, Yamamoto wearily reached for the hairdryer. Hearing this, Hayashi immediately perked up, cheerfully asking if he really agreed. Soon the girl was sitting on the floor, buried in her phone, while the guy behind her dried her hair, sitting on the bed. Through the noise of the hairdryer, Hayashi called his name. Then, unexpectedly, she praised him, noting that he was doing a pretty good job. Yamamoto calmly asked, "Is there really anything difficult about this?" The girl replied that it didn't seem that way to her. As she continued scrolling through her phone, she suddenly realized that she got the feeling he'd been around girls before, since he knew so well how to handle long hair. The guy calmly replied that skills like that were actually valued among men. A little while later, Hayashi suddenly called his name again, saying she'd been thinking about something. Hearing this, the guy asked what exactly. Then the girl unexpectedly asked if he really had no friends at all. Taken by surprise, Yamamoto's hand even jerked along with the hairdryer. After a moment's hesitation, he honestly admitted that it was true. Hearing such a straightforward admission, Hayashi couldn't help but chuckle, saying she'd expected him to argue at length and try to wriggle out of it. After that, the girl started teasing him, mimicking how he usually nitpicks over words and demands a definition of friendship. Yamamoto just muttered discontentedly that she was clearly making fun of him. Hayashi calmly replied that she simply wanted to talk to Akari about his problems with friends, and then suggested that he discuss it normally as well. However, the guy flatly refused. The girl immediately asked why. In response, Yamamoto just asked irritably, "Why should I agree to anything at all?" Then Hayashi quietly called his name again. Hearing this, the boy asked what else she wanted. Turning around and looking up at him, The girl unexpectedly declared seriously that she was ready to do everything in her power if he honestly told her what he really wanted. Yamamoto stared at her silently for a few seconds, then awkwardly ruffled his hair and quietly replied that he would think about it. Soon the drawing was finished, and Hayashi thanked him. Watching the girl, the guy gradually sank in his own thoughts. Despite everything she'd been through, Hayashi looked happy now. What's more, she was still popular, as evidenced by her constantly vibrating phone. Glancing at the screen, Yamamoto noticed a message from Mayachi, in which she wrote that she would see her soon. A few days later, Yamamoto was sitting at the table in his apartment across from Hayashi, looking serious and even a little stern. The girl was calmly scrolling through her phone at that moment, but, noticing his expression, she was distracted and asked what he wanted to talk about. The guy immediately announced that they'd be talking about cleaning. Upon hearing this, Hayashi wearily reminded him that he had long since exceeded his daily cleaning quota. Scratching his cheek awkwardly, the guy cautiously suggested extending that time, even just a little. However, Hayashi flatly refused right away. Hearing such a categorical response, Yamamoto resignedly buried his face in the table, complaining, "What's so bad about cleaning anyway? And why doesn't she feel like doing it at all?" The girl calmly asked if he really had nothing else to do. The guy honestly replied that the only thing he had was his studies. Then Hayashi suggested he make some friends, but he declared with a completely serious expression that friends take up too much time. Hearing this, the girl just let out a heavy sigh. She got up from the table, clearly deciding to end the conversation. Calmly heading to the kitchen, she said she might as well start cooking. Yamamoto watched her go, noting to himself that she was always trying to escape conversations like this. At the same time, he understood perfectly well that if he kept pushing her, he would only ruin her mood completely. And in the worst case, she'd forbid him from cleaning up altogether. While the guy was pondering how he could still get his way, Hayashi leaned toward the fridge and suddenly noticed that they were out of miso. The girl immediately clasped her hands together, apologizing and admitting that she had forgotten to add it to the shopping list. Yamamoto calmly replied that it was okay and that everyone makes mistakes. With a slight smile, he added that he'd made a mistake himself recently, continuing to clean for another hour after she'd called him to dinner. Hearing this, Hayashi immediately retorted coldly that it wasn't a mistake at all. For a few seconds, the guy looked at her in surprise. Then, unexpectedly, he perked up sharply and declared in an inspired voice that he would go get some miso right then and there. Hayashi looked at him suspiciously, clearly not understanding where this sudden change of mood had come from. Meanwhile, Yamamoto continued to speak confidently, saying that he had actually always loved miso. However, to himself, he was already thinking that if he could win Hayashi over now, she might let him take a little longer to clean up. Continuing to hatch his devious plans, the guy added that in a relationship, it's very important to support each other and be able to forgive mistakes. The girl agreed with his words, though she looked suspicious. Yamamoto, for his part, was already mentally picturing how he would finally be able to clean the entire apartment properly. However, Hayashi quickly picked up on the suspicious undertone in his overly kind behavior. Her expression immediately darkened, and she quietly remarked that, for some reason, she had the feeling he had an ulterior motive. The guy bluntly declared that she was just imagining things. At the same time, he continued to hope that, given her personality, she would still feel obligated to him after his help. The main thing was just not to let her figure it out. Quickly slinging his backpack over his shoulder, he was about to leave, but Hayashi unexpectedly stopped him. Pressing her hand to her chest, the girl declared that she would go with him too. Yamamoto looked at her in surprise. She calmly explained that since it was her mistake, she should go too. The guy tried to object, saying that dividing the responsibilities would be much more efficient. However, Hayashi immediately offered to help him with the cleaning instead. Upon hearing this, Yamamoto instantly refused. The girl immediately remarked calmly that if he wasn't going to streamline the cleaning, he shouldn't even talk about efficiency. Realizing that there was indeed logic in her words, the guy resignedly admitted defeat, and he told her to get ready. Hearing this, Hayashi immediately jumped up to the closet, asking him to wait just a second. While the girl was getting changed, Yamamoto stood in the hallway, staring thoughtfully at the door to the room. A thought flashed through his mind that the last time Hayashi had gone out for a walk was a week ago with Akari, so he hadn't expected her to agree so readily to go out again. A short while later, the two of them stepped outside. It was sweltering out, and the air was so stifling that it was hard to breathe. Both Yamamoto and Hayashi quietly complained about the weather, nearly dying from the heat. Looking at the girl, the guy suddenly noticed that she looked way too good for someone who had just been complaining about feeling like she was about to die. Hearing this, Hayashi asked in surprise if that was really true. Then, with a sly smile, the girl suddenly declared that she had realized something. Yamamoto asked, "What exactly?" Then Hayashi, looking at him playfully, remarked that from the outside, they looked like they were going on a date right now. After those words, the The guy immediately looked away, and the girl, noticing his reaction, giggled softly. With a smile, she remarked that his heart seemed to have stopped and his face had turned red. Yamamoto hastily claimed that the heat was to blame and that he had simply overheated. Hearing such an excuse, Hayashi just laughed, calling it terribly silly. Once inside the store, Yamamoto watched the girl irritably, mentally complaining that she had absolutely no idea where such behavior could lead. And if something really did happen, for some reason, he would still be the one to blame. Meanwhile, Hayashi calmly walked behind him between the shelves, continuing to tease him and suggesting he leave all his love for Akari. He just asked her to shut up, looking annoyed. Picking up a package of miso, the girl suddenly asked why he was in such a hurry to buy it and go straight home. Yamamoto calmly replied that they had actually come just for that. However, Hayashi unexpectedly grabbed his hand and playfully pulled him along, suggesting that since they were already there, they should look at something else. The guy immediately asked her not to run so fast, since it was dangerous. To himself, he thought that, apparently, after a week cooped up indoors, the girl was just too happy to be out walking normally again. Passing by the shelves of sports nutrition products, Hayashi stared in surprise at the price tags on the protein powder, amazed at how expensive it was. After that, she suddenly asked if Yamamoto had ever tried anything like that. He calmly replied that he used to drink protein shakes all the time since he'd been into weightlifting back in high school. Hearing this, the girl suddenly started laughing. The guy asked, annoyed, what was so funny. He began to explain that he went to the gym, packed his own lunches, and even kept track of his protein, fat, and carbohydrate intake. Hayashi pointed out in surprise that he had said he only cooked simple meals. Yamamoto then explained that he would simply buy high-protein foods separately and carry them with him. The girl immediately called him a weirdo. With a slight smile, the guy admitted that he actually wanted to control his breakfast and dinner as well, but his mother and younger sister strictly forbade him from doing so. And only after he finished speaking did he suddenly realize that Hayashi had just called him a weirdo. Looking at the girl in surprise, the guy noticed how she abruptly changed the subject and asked if he had a younger sister. Yamamoto calmly confirmed it. Then Hayashi asked why he had stopped going to the gym after moving. The guy honestly admitted that he was just tired of looking for the right place. The girl looked away briefly, then quietly remarked that, as usual, he was putting too much effort into everything he did. After that, she started laughing again, assuming that he must have thought it would make him more popular with girls. Yamamoto asked in all seriousness, wasn't that supposed to work? However, at that moment, a familiar female voice suddenly rang out behind them. Turning around, they saw Mayachi. A rather strange, forced smile was frozen on the girl's face, which made the atmosphere around them suddenly feel a little awkward. Stepping closer, she immediately addressed Hayashi, asking who the guy next to her was. Hayashi immediately perked up and greeted her friend cheerfully. Yamamoto, meanwhile, watched silently as the girls chatted easily with each other, noting to himself that they were clearly quite close. At the same time, he clearly remembered that Hayashi had said she hardly ever socialized with her classmates, so the guy decided that this must be an old acquaintance of hers. Soon, Hayashi introduced Yamamoto to her friend. Mayachi greeted him politely, and the guy calmly returned the greeting. However, almost immediately, the girl unexpectedly asked what their relationship was. Hayashi was visibly flustered and couldn't think of a reply. Yamamoto himself immediately thought that it was clearly not worth talking about living together right now, so he calmly stated that they were just friends. Hearing this, Hayashi asked again, sounding displeased, "Are you really just friends?" The guy was mentally surprised because for him personally, that was a perfectly normal way to describe their relationship. Mayachi, however, calmly accepted this answer and changed the subject. After a while, she asked Hayashi if she was free next Saturday. Hearing this, the girl looked questioningly at her friend. Hayashi explained that summer vacation was about to start and it would be nice to go to a summer festival together. When Yamamoto heard about the festival, he immediately thought that Hayashi really hadn't gone out anywhere properly in a long time and that such an offer would do her good, especially since it involved meeting up with a friend. However, Hayashi herself guiltily declined. Yamamoto immediately asked in surprise why. The girl awkwardly admitted that she simply didn't have any money. Upon hearing this, the guy unexpectedly began actively trying to convince her to agree after all. He said that the festival didn't require a lot of money, and that she shouldn't miss the chance to spend time with friends. Moreover, he added that such memories are very important. Hearing this, Hayashi unexpectedly reminded him that just recently he himself had called friends a waste of time. Yamamoto fell silent immediately, then reluctantly admitted that she was right. Hayashi smiled quietly and agreed that he was probably right and that she really should go. The guy crossed his arms over his chest, exhaled, and declared that she needed to care more about her friends. Hearing such advice from him, of all people, Hayashi couldn't help but laugh. Yamamoto asked her sheepishly not to laugh so hard, and the girl immediately apologized, still giggling quietly. All this time, Miyachi had been watching their conversation closely. Before leaving, she said she would let them know the meeting place and time later. Hayashi waved happily at her, saying she would wait for the message. As they were saying goodbye, Miyachi remarked with a slight smile that she didn't want to take up any more of such a cute couple's time. Upon hearing the word couple, Hayashi immediately became flustered and blushed. Yamamoto, meanwhile, noted to himself just how awkward that it sounded. He quickly added that they didn't look like a couple at all. After that, the guy turned to Hayashi and added that it seemed Miyachi just didn't understand these things very well, so next time she should correct her friend right away. Hearing this, Hayashi suddenly shot him a dark look. A thought flashed through the girl's mind that he didn't need to deny it so vehemently. After that, she simply walked on. Noticing her mood, Yamamoto immediately began apologizing awkwardly. However, the girl merely stated curtly that everything was fine and they could forget about it. The guy immediately realized that she was still angry. Continuing to walk ahead of him with a displeased look, Hayashi said she wanted to buy some miso as soon as possible and go home. Yamamoto immediately caught up to her, asking her not to be angry. The girl immediately replied that she wasn't angry. However, the guy calmly pointed out that that's exactly what people who are angry usually say. Still unhappy, Hayashi suddenly declared that she was definitely going to get drunk at the festival. Yamamoto caught up to her and calmly replied that in that case, she should at least eat properly, since she was too skinny. The girl immediately crossed her arms over her chest and asked him to stop staring at her so intently. The guy calmly reminded her that they do live together, so he simply can't help but notice. After grumbling a bit, Hayashi finally agreed with him. Meanwhile, Yamamoto kept thinking that she was clearly still upset, even though he still hadn't figured out exactly what had hurt Hayashi so much back then. A couple of days later, Yamamoto was sitting in a university lecture hall, listening to the professor announce the end of the exam. Checking his answer sheet, the young man noted to himself that he had already gone over everything 3 times and there shouldn't be any mistakes. Realizing that the semester was finally over, he felt a noticeable sense of relief. As he was gathering his things, he heard a familiar female voice to his left. Turning around, he noticed Akari talking to another girl. For a second, Akari glanced in his direction, as if she were about to say something. However, she then simply walked away without even saying hello. Yamamoto noted to himself that it was probably for the best. They weren't that close anyway, and neither of them needed any unnecessary questions or rumors right now. Already sitting on the subway on his way home, the guy took out his phone, and he started searching online for gift ideas for his girlfriend to cheer her up. He realized that Hayashi seemed to have stopped being angry pretty quickly, but at the same time, he had absolutely no idea what she actually liked. What's more, if the gift turned out to be too expensive, the situation would only get worse. As he kept scrolling through the options, Yamamoto looked at cosmetics, lip glosses, blush, perfume, combs, boxes of candy, jewelry, and various accessories. However, the longer he looked, the more he realized he couldn't make up his mind at all. Despite this, he decided to stop by the store in person anyway. As he walked between the shops, he kept thinking that he was unlikely to find anything truly suitable. But at some point, his gaze suddenly caught on one item. Yamamoto stared at it silently for a few seconds, then realized he had finally found exactly what he needed. A couple of hours later, Yamamoto returned home. As he entered the apartment, he looked tired, was breathing heavily, and was drenched in sweat from the heat. Taking off his shoes in the entryway, the guy immediately announced that he was back. Hayashi, who was sitting at the table, turned to him and calmly greeted him, then immediately handed him a glass of cold iced tea. Yamamoto gratefully took it and immediately began drinking greedily, as if he had just emerged from the desert. Watching this, the girl propped her cheek with her hand and remarked with a slight smirk that he was acting like an old man. The two of them sat at a small table, and the air conditioner hummed quietly in the background, saving the apartment from stifling heat. Hearing her words, Yamamoto indignantly declared that she was actually saying that to a 19-year-old guy in the prime of his life. Hayashi smiled quietly and, as if agreeing, said that she had indeed forgotten that he was only 19. The guy gave her a disgruntled look and declared that he was actually still 17. The girl merely offered a brief apology and immediately changed the subject, noting that he had done well on the tests. Yamamoto calmly accepted the praise, taking it for granted. Then Hayashi asked if he was worried about the results. The boy asked in surprise if she really thought he was capable of worrying about something like that. Hayashi immediately called his excessive self-confidence disgusting. Hearing this, Yamamoto grumpily declared that it wasn't about confidence at all. He was simply certain that he had done everything right. After that, he calmly added that modesty is most often just a mask for insecurity. The girl watched awkwardly as he launched into another monologue. Yamamoto went on to say that he thought it was pointless to hide one's results, since they were precisely what allowed one to understand how successful a person truly was. Hayashi looked at him questioningly, not quite understanding where he was going with this. Then the guy explained that people who are initially content with mediocre results will never be able to achieve anything truly great. Hayashi objected, saying that some people still get good grades, even if they don't obsess over it. You see people like that on TV all the time. Yamamoto immediately shook his head and declared that this wasn't the case at all. In his opinion, such people study not for the sake of grades, but because they genuinely enjoy the learning process itself. Good results are merely a consequence of that interest. Inspired by his own thoughts, the young man raised his index finger and began to explain that the original goal for such people is completely different. Hayashi thoughtfully agreed that there was logic to this. However, Yamamoto was already continuing to argue more and more passionately that one must study with the results in mind. Otherwise, a person will never achieve anything. In his opinion, it is results that reflect a person's true success. Folding his arms across his chest, he reiterated that all that feigned modesty was really just plain old self-doubt. The girl continued to watch his serious expression in silence. Then, suddenly, she quietly remarked that, in that case, it turned out he really never pretended, because he had nothing to fear. The guy calmly confirmed her words. After that, Hayashi unexpectedly smiled and said that he spoke as if he were already living a second life. She added that he must have a ton of success stories under his belt. Hearing this, Yamamoto unexpectedly looked down and quietly admitted that, in fact, he had far more failures than successes. After a brief pause, he added that people can only learn from their own mistakes. You can only analyze regrets. That's just how people are. Hearing this, Hayashi also paused to think for a moment. Then the girl calmly asked, "If you really do learn from your mistakes and regrets, why haven't you done anything about your attitude toward your friends?" Yamamoto looked at her, slightly bewildered. Hayashi continued, noting the results aren't just reflected in grades. After that, she smiled slyly and reminded him that back in the store, he himself had convinced her to go out and have fun with her friend. According to her, his words and actions didn't match at all. The guy exhaled heavily and calmly replied that he and other people were just different. He was completely satisfied with things as they were, so he saw no point in changing anything. After that, Yamamoto admitted that he had always not cared about friends. Images of people from his past began to surface in his mind. Classmates, acquaintances, teachers, family, all those he had once had to part ways with. He calmly realized that he had never regretted such goodbyes. Not once. That's why losing someone had never felt like a real failure to him. After saying this, Hayashi smiled slightly, with a touch of sadness, and looked away. She was silent for a few seconds, and then she quietly asked what he would feel if she were to leave one day. Hearing this question, Yamamoto fell silent. The thought immediately crossed his mind that the day Hayashi would leave would indeed come someday. After all, they weren't even dating. Moreover, he himself didn't know if they could even be called friends. He lowered his gaze. The boy honestly admitted that he didn't know the answer. However, he knew one thing for sure. He didn't want to regret it. Hayashi asked in surprise why. Then Yamamoto looked up and gazed seriously straight at her. In a calm voice, he declared that she was important to him. The girl froze in bewilderment, clearly not expecting to hear such a thing. After a short pause, the guy quietly added that to him, Hayashi was already like family. Hearing the word family, the girl visibly flinched. She quietly reminded him that her own parents had abandoned her. Then, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear and looking at him with a gentle smile, she added that, in that case, he was her only family too. A silence hung between them for a few seconds. After that, Yamamoto suddenly reached for his backpack and said that he actually wanted to give her something. Hayashi asked in surprise, "What exactly?" Then the boy handed her a beautiful bag with a floral pattern. The girl carefully peeked inside and immediately realized it was a yukata. She asked in surprise where he had gotten it. Yamamoto calmly admitted that he had bought it specifically for the festival, and he'd like Hayashi to wear it there. The girl looked at the gift in confusion, clearly not knowing how to react. However, the guy immediately asked her not to worry, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. He admitted that he had wanted to buy it himself. After that, Yamamoto added that he wanted to consider this gift an apology for what had happened. Hayashi asked, confused, what exactly was he talking about? Then the guy reminded her of the situation in the store when she got angry at him. Yamamoto admitted that he had long suffered from his habit of repeating the same things and often regretted his own words. That is exactly why he always tries to apologize whenever the opportunity arises. After that, the guy added that if she felt too awkward to accept the gift just like that, she could grant him one wish. The girl immediately asked with interest, what exactly? Then Yamamoto, with a slight smile, asked her to make the summer festival unforgettable for him as well. Hearing this, Hayashi looked at him with warmth and gratitude. After that, she quietly thanked him. and she promised that she would definitely enjoy the festival to the fullest. At that moment, he couldn't even imagine that he would truly never forget this festival. A few more days passed, and the day of the festival arrived. Yamamoto sat restlessly in the apartment, waiting for Hayashi. At some point, her voice came from behind the door. The girl cautiously asked if he would help her. The guy immediately realized that she had already changed into a yukata and asked her to confirm it. Hayashi quietly nodded. Yamamoto wondered why she always got so nervous when he was just trying to be considerate. However, the very next second, the door swung open. Standing before him was Hayashi in a beautiful light-colored yukata with a floral pattern. A neat flower was pinned in her hair, and she was holding a small handbag in her hands. For a few seconds, Yamamoto just stared at her in silence, clearly at a loss for words. Hayashi grew a little nervous under his gaze and immediately asked him to be honest. After that, the girl declared with her usual confidence that she actually looked like a real beauty. Hearing this, Yamamoto awkwardly remarked that she was too confident in her appearance. However, Hayashi immediately began to defend herself, saying that wasn't what she meant at all. The guy looked at her closely once more, and then he quietly admitted that she really was cute. Hearing this, Hayashi immediately exclaimed happily that she'd known all along. Yamamoto immediately asked, annoyed, why she was yelling at him over something like that. However, the girl had already moved closer and asked him to repeat it again. The guy asked, puzzled, what exactly she wanted to hear. Then Hayashi, with a satisfied smile, asked him to continue, because she really liked hearing that from him. Yamamoto sighed wearily and declared that she was completely incorrigible. However, after gathering his thoughts, he looked at her again and admitted much more honestly that she really was very beautiful. Hearing these words, the girl smiled happily and even blushed slightly. Watching her smug expression, Yamamoto couldn't help but wonder where on earth she got so much self-confidence from. Hayashi smiled contentedly, clearly enjoying Yamamoto's reaction. The guy, still watching her smug expression, asked in bewilderment, then why did she call him over in the first place? Instead of answering, the girl handed him a small box of foundation and asked him to help her apply it. Yamamoto looked at her in surprise and asked if she couldn't handle it herself. Hayashi immediately shook her head and hurriedly explained that she wasn't talking about her face at all. After that, she carefully rolled up the sleeve of her yukata, revealing the bruises on her arm. The girl quietly explained that if the sleeve accidentally got caught during the festival, everything would be visible. It was especially difficult for her to hide the bruises on her right arm by herself. After that, Hayashi added that Yamamoto was good at handling small tasks. Hearing this, the guy immediately agreed with her words. Hayashi immediately smirked and asked, what kind of smug expression is that? However, Yamamoto stated in all seriousness that when it came to detailed work, there really was no one better than him. The thought even flashed through his mind that drying Hayashi's hair had turned out to be unexpectedly pleasant. What's more, this was the second time he'd done it in the past week. While the guy opened the box of foundation and looked at the small mirror inside, Hayashi began to explain how to apply the product correctly. She quietly explained that the cream should be gently patted into the skin, carefully blended in, and then lightly pressed with a sponge to ensure even distribution. Yamamoto listened intently to her instructions and nodded thoughtfully. He picked up the sponge. He carefully began applying the foundation to her skin, trying to conceal the bruises as neatly as possible. At one point, Hayashi let out a quiet sigh without meaning to. This made the guy immediately ask her, somewhat embarrassed, not to make such strange noises. The girl immediately apologized awkwardly. Finishing his work, Yamamoto handed the box back to her. Hayashi looked closely at her hand and noticed with surprise that he really was too good at this sort of thing. The guy immediately added awkwardly that if she told anyone about his skills, it would be almost an insult to him. Hayashi just smiled quietly and said it was time for them to leave. However, at that moment, footsteps were suddenly heard approaching from the hallway. Yamamoto immediately became alert and wondered who on earth could be coming at a time like this. The thought of some pushy salesman even flashed through his mind. If that was really the case, it would be better to just pretend no one was home. But before the guy could say anything, Hayashi calmly opened the door and cheerfully invited the guest in. The next second, Akari appeared in the hallway. Hayashi immediately greeted her friend cheerfully, saying they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Akari also started waving back happily. Yamamoto, however, watched the scene with complete bewilderment, having absolutely no idea what Akari was even doing at their house. Akari immediately noticed her yukata and asked in surprise why she had already changed. After that, Akari smiled and called her a real cutie. Hayashi immediately announced happily that Yamamoto had given her this yukata. Hearing this, Kasahara looked in surprise, first at her friend, and then at the guy himself. However, Hayashi quickly began to explain that she had originally planned to use Akari's car for the trip, but the taxi had been waiting outside for too long, so she had to run. After saying this, the girl abruptly jumped up and dashed out of the apartment, cheerfully shouting to Akari as she left that she should have fun with Yamamoto for now. Even as she ran out the door, Hayashi kept giggling. An awkward silence hung in the hallway. Akari stood there with a puzzled look on her face. Meanwhile, Yamamoto slowly stepped out of the room into the hallway. Akari immediately turned to him and asked very grimly for an explanation. The guy asked in surprise, "What exactly do I need to explain?" After that, he began to figure out what was going on and realized that Hayashi had simply set everything up in advance. Apparently, she had deliberately left them alone together, trying to set him up with Akari. However, the girl immediately cut him off and declared that she wasn't talking about that at all. She was much more concerned about why Yamamoto had given Hayashi a yukata in the first place. Hearing this question, the guy fell silent, looking flustered. Akari, meanwhile, turned away, looking hurt, and quietly admitted that she herself had wanted to give Hayashi a yukata for the festival. Yamamoto awkwardly scratched the back of his head and suggested they at least go back inside the apartment so they wouldn't disturb the neighbors with their conversation in the hallway. A short while later, they were sitting at a table in the room. Looking at Akari's sad face, the guy gently asked her not to be upset. He added that he would definitely talk to Hayashi later, but for now, Akari could relax, have a drink, and then go home. With that, he placed a glass in front of her. Hearing his suggestion that she leave, Akari looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears, and quietly asked if he really wanted her to go. Yamamoto honestly replied that he did. However, he immediately added awkwardly that he was only half serious. In fact, he didn't mind at all if she stayed a little longer. Hearing this, the girl looked up at him with hope in her eyes and quietly said that in that case, she would stay a little longer. Outside the window at that moment, the shouts of children running through the evening street could be heard, and the sounds of the festival were already drifting in from afar. Yamamoto looked at Akari in silence for a while. Then he calmly asked what the real reason for her behavior was. The girl sadly lowered her head onto the table and admitted that after what Hayashi had said, she now felt awkward about just getting up and leaving. Hearing this, the guy suggested they at least chat a little. After that, he admitted that he was starting to feel a little hungry, and he suggested grabbing a bite to eat somewhere along the way. At that moment, Akari's face suddenly lit up. It was as if an idea had just struck her. She immediately suggested they go to the summer festival together. Hearing this, Yamamoto remarked resignedly that it seemed he wouldn't be able to refuse anyway. Akari, smiling contentedly and resting her chin on her hands, declared that otherwise he would upset her. The guy understood perfectly well that he had practically no say in the matter anymore. What's more, he didn't like crowded places at all, but there was nowhere else to go. As they walked through the evening streets, Akari suddenly remarked that walking together at night felt very much like a real date. Yamamoto calmly agreed with her. The girl immediately added that it reminded her of the times when they were actually dating. The guy agreed to that as well, without much emotion. However, Akari immediately asked him indignantly not to treat such memories so lightly and indifferently. They continued walking down the street. The girl suddenly asked how he was getting along with Hayashi. Yamamoto replied briefly that everything was fine. However, Akari immediately asked again, "Is that really true?" The guy calmly confirmed it once more. Then Akari remarked that he really had no idea how to speak directly. Hearing this, Yamamoto looked at her in surprise and asked, "Is that so?" After that, the guy suddenly stated calmly that he had already made too many girls cry simply because he told them what he really thought. Akari immediately pointed out that maybe it wasn't about honesty, but that he was just acting like a jerk. Then she brought up Hayashi again and asked how things were really going between them. Yamamoto wearily asked her to stop prying and wondered why she cared so much about their lives in the first place. Then Akari honestly admitted that she was just curious. After all, she and Hayashi hadn't gotten along at all in high school, so it was hard for her to believe that they were now living together peacefully. Wasn't that strange? However, Yamamoto still felt that it wasn't just a matter of ordinary curiosity. Akari, meanwhile, went on to say that if their classmates found out about this, they'd be in for a real shock. She even recalled how Hayashi used to turn her nose up at Yamamoto whenever she saw him at school. Hearing this, the guy remarked with a slight smirk that their former classmates would probably think Hayashi had really hit rock bottom now that she was living with him. However, Akari immediately objected, saying that wasn't the case at all. In her opinion, people would likely conclude that Yamamoto is actually a very kind person. It's just that people usually don't notice others' kind deeds until they affect them personally. After that, Yamamoto suddenly remarked that she seemed to have changed a little since their last meeting. Hearing this, Akari smiled calmly, looking ahead. Yamamoto looked at her in surprise. Then she suddenly asked why he had even let Hayashi go so far all by herself. The guy calmly replied that she had actually gone with a friend from college. Hearing this, Akari asked again, "Which friend are you talking about?" Yamamoto replied that it was Maiachi. At that moment, Akari thought for a moment and began to recall the girl they had accidentally met at the supermarket. She quietly asked, "Didn't Hayashi and I meet at the university?" Hearing this question, Yamamoto suddenly felt a strange sense of unease. It was as if something had snapped in his head. He began to realize that all this time he had been convinced that Maiachi was an old friend of Hayashi's. As they walked out of the station platform, Akari continued to explain that the festival was quite far from there. However, Maiachi had told her that she lived right next to the very supermarket where they had recently met. And at that moment, it finally dawned on Yamamoto that the address Maiachi had given was a lie. The guy stopped abruptly and grabbed Akari by the shoulders. For the first time, his voice sounded genuinely frightened. He began demanding that she tell him immediately where Hayashi was. Akari replied, flustered, that she thought she knew. Then Yamamoto began demanding an answer even more insistently. Akari quickly pulled out her phone and opened the geolocation tracking app. Even a shadow of anxiety flashed across her face at that moment. The girl showed him the map and quietly informed him that Hayashi was very far from the festival grounds. Seeing this, Yamamoto immediately sprang to his feet. He ran across the platform, shouting at Akari as he went to call the police immediately. The girl stood where she was, staring after him in shock. Yamamoto himself was already rushing through the crowd at the festival, pushing past passers-by and desperately trying to reach Hayashi. Thoughts were racing through his head. He recalled that Hayashi and Maiachi had run into each other twice near the supermarket next to his house, even though it took more than 30 minutes to get from the festival to that spot. There was no way this could be a coincidence. All this time, Yamamoto had been convinced that it was Hayashi's ex-boyfriend who would seek revenge on them. But now he realized just how naive he had been. That man had never once shown up near their apartment, which meant he'd been hiding somewhere all this time. A terrifying thought flashed through Yamamoto's mind, that Maiachi might be hiding Utsumi at her place. What's more, perhaps she was the one who helped him lure Hayashi into a trap. The guy was desperately trying to figure out exactly what Seiji had said to Maiachi to make her go along with something like this. His heart was pounding wildly in his chest, and an even more terrifying realization was slowly taking shape in his mind. Perhaps Maiachi genuinely hated Hayashi. Meanwhile, Hayashi herself was walking calmly alongside Maiachi down the dark street. Her friend suddenly remarked that the yukata looked great on her. Hayashi smiled as she looked down at the sleeves and thanked her. Then Maiachi asked if she had bought the yukata herself. Hayashi immediately admitted that she had received it as a gift. Hearing this, the girl started teasing her, assuming that her boyfriend had given it to her. Hayashi quickly objected, saying that Yamamoto wasn't her boyfriend at all and that there was nothing going on between them. Maiachi thoughtfully remarked that from the outside, he seemed like a pretty nice guy. Hayashi immediately started grumbling, calling Yamamoto neurotic, a terrible bore, and too meticulous. However, almost immediately she admitted that she could always count on him. Hearing this, the girl fell into a strange reverie. Soon the girls turned into a dark alley. Maiachi calmly stated that it was a shortcut. However, Hayashi immediately felt uneasy. There were fewer and fewer people around. Moreover, according to the map, the festival was supposed to be just 5 minutes from the station, but they had been walking for much longer. Hayashi began to trail cautiously behind her friend. At one point, Maiachi stopped abruptly and unexpectedly asked if Hayashi remembered the party where she had met her ex-boyfriend. Hearing this, Hayashi tensed up and asked her to explain what the question was about. However, Maiachi simply demanded an answer. Hayashi admitted that she remembered everything perfectly. Something like that is impossible to forget. After that, Maiachi quietly stated that she had liked that guy too. Hayashi asked in surprise, "What on earth are you talking about?" That was the first time the girl had ever spoken Seiji Utsumi's name out loud. Hearing that name, Hayashi felt a chill run through her. Maiachi lowered her gaze and confessed that it hurt terribly because she had liked Utsumi at first sight. Memories of her ex-boyfriend immediately flooded Hayashi's mind. Meanwhile, Maiachi continued to say that Hayashi had literally stolen him right from under her nose. A few days ago, she had run into Seiji near the university. At first, she was very nervous and didn't know if she should even approach him first. For a moment, Hayashi's face flashed before her eyes, and her conscience pricked her briefly. However, in the end, she spoke to him anyway. She even offered to let him hide at her place. Upon hearing this, Hayashi asked in shock, "Did Maiachi really know everything from the very beginning?" The girl calmly confirmed it. Moreover, it was precisely because of that she had been deliberately showing up near that supermarket again and again until she finally ran into her. Maiachi admitted that back then she had even had to lie about her address so as not to arouse suspicion. After that, her voice began to tremble more and more. The girl declared with hatred that she knew absolutely everything about their relationship. All the arguments, all the domestic violence, every detail. According to Maiachi, Hayashi had taken everything from her and then ruined Utsumi's life with false accusations. She said that Hayashi had taken his property and was now living peacefully, while Seiji himself continued to suffer. Behind them, festive fireworks were going off at that moment, but neither of the girls cared at all. Tears began to stream down Maiachi's face. She looked at Hayashi with despair and hatred, calling her a worthless woman and asking why she had made Seiji suffer. Hayashi looked away and quietly replied that he had brought it all on himself. And just then, heavy, labored breathing could be heard behind them. Hayashi spun around and saw Yamamoto. The guy was breathing heavily after a long run, but he immediately ran up to her and stood in front of her, shielding her with his body. Then he gave Maiachi a cold stare and asked what the hell she was doing here. The girl just smirked and asked sarcastically if he decided to play the role of a loyal knight protecting a poor girl. She accused Yamamoto of being the one sheltering this stupid woman. However, the guy calmly replied that it didn't matter whether he was an idiot or not. After that, he sharply added that Maiachi herself was a complete idiot. Hearing this, the girl indignantly demanded an explanation. Then Yamamoto coldly stated that he was simply calling a stupid woman stupid. Maiachi started screaming, asking how he dared to speak of her that way. However, the guy immediately asked, "Then what do you call someone who unconditionally believed Utsumi's tall tales?" Hearing that word, the girl asked again, confused. After that, Maiachi began desperately insisting that Seiji had proof and that she believed him. Yamamoto immediately asked what kind of proof she had actually seen. Then the guy started grilling her with questions, asking if she had ever even properly checked his claims. Maiachi tried to object in a trembling voice, saying there was no need for that because Seiji would never lie to her. Then Yamamoto sharply reminded her of the bruises on Hayashi's body, which she herself had seen at the supermarket. He stated outright that it was Utsumi who had beaten Hayashi. Upon hearing this, Maiachi trembled even more. Nevertheless, she tried to defend herself, saying that Seiji had already told her about it. Yamamoto then took another step forward and coldly asked if Utsumi had told her that he himself had caused those bruises. Hearing this question, Maiachi froze. The girl quietly said yes, but it was clear she didn't believe what was happening. Yamamoto glares at Maiachi with cold anger and continues, saying that Utsumi's words cannot be considered reliable just because he's telling a version that suits him and ignoring everything else. He adds that any of his claims must be verified and compared with the facts. At that moment, Maiachi snaps and yells at him to shut up. She yanks a kitchen knife out her pocket and lunges forward straight at Yamamoto. Hayashi freezes in horror and doesn't even have time to react. She backs away. She falls, ending up behind him and watching everything unfold, while Yamamoto doesn't back down or run away. He just stands there, staring at Maiachi. And in the next second, Hayashi calls his name in a trembling voice, and she sees dark blood begin to drip between them in the tense silence. To be continued. Thanks for watching. Write your feedback in the comments. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. See you soon.